Hey, welcome into Rob Wright's Gen X Pop Culture. In today's show, we're doing a wrap up of Band of Brothers. And with me, as always, is Heather L. And today we've got our honored guest, historian Marty Morgan from the Stephen Ambrose Tours. Marty, thank you so much for being with us on the show. Could you maybe give a brief introduction of yourself and what you do?
Yeah, my name is Marty Morgan. I'm an author and historian. I study the American experience during the 20th century, primarily during times of war. And because of that background, it led me eventually to tour guiding, which is something that I've been doing for over 20 years now, with most of my work being associated with Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours, a tour and destination management company that's based in New Orleans. And I ended up there partly because I had worked for Dr. Stephen Ambrose during the last 2 years of his life. I wasn't a part of the making of Band of Brothers, but I was around right when Band of Brothers was released back in 2001. And I have been leading tours to Europe ever since, many of them themed toward the series Band of Brothers, which is how I met you, Rob. And I enjoyed traveling with you and getting to know you on that recent trip.
Yeah, thank you, Marty. Yeah, and it was a great tour. And folks, I would say that this experience was just incredible. A lot of fun. Stephen Ambrose Tours is an amazing tour group. We had an amazing time. There's a link below in the comment section or in the section that describes the video to click on that if you want to check out some of the tours. These tours are really cool. My mom has been on a couple and she recommended it to me. And this Band of Brothers tour was excellent. I looked at some of the other tours that other companies were doing, and I feel that the one that Marty led on the Stephen Ambrose was the most extensive. And we find out so much about the history and get to see so much. And today we're going to share some of that with you guys and talk about some of the places we went. There are some surprises that we're going to remain surprised because Stephen Ambrose Tours has some unique experience that they offer in their packages. And I want to keep those as surprises for folks so that you go on the tour, but a lot of stuff. Let me share my first screen and really we'll talk about the tour. And it really has to start with the wonderful people that went on the tour. And here we go. Here's a couple of pictures of the folks here. And there's Marty right there as well. But we had a wonderful tour group. And Marty, can you maybe just tell a little bit about the tours and how they're set up and what they do?
Yeah, our tours are structured around with a historical theme. So every Stephen Ambrose tour, it includes a tour manager and a tour historian. And it's because Stephen Ambrose Tours recognized long ago that there are plenty of companies that can take you to Europe, but there aren't many companies that can take you to Europe to follow a specific chapter in history. We've got a heavy focus on World War II history. That's not the only thing that the company does, but there's a heavy focus on that. And because of that focus, there's going to be an historian. It's part of the tradition that Stephen Ambrose started when he created the company way back in 1979. And I'm one of the historians, one of many historians that works for the company in leading these tours.
Yeah. And we had an excellent group. I'm just so thankful for all the wonderful people that we had on tour. We just had a blast. It was really a lot of fun. And you'll see some of these pictures with everybody that I'm sharing right now. Just shows that the group at some of these wonderful places. And hopefully Stephen Ambrose can use some of these pictures as well.
And I'm remembering the wonderful weather that we had at Berchtesgaden and when we went to Eagle's Nest, based on your photos. That was lucky too.
Yeah, we were real fortunate with a lot of the weather. I mean, the only time it really rained was when we were in Normandy the first couple of days, but then it kind of cleared up. So,
and I think you might remember me saying the first night that we're going to Normandy, so we will get rained on. There is no tour that goes to Normandy and dodges the bullet. You get rained on in Normandy. That's just the way it works.
So I have a question then. How long, like when did this specific tour start? Was it like immediately after the show, or did it take some time for this concept to catch on? Was it like previously more of just a World War II tour and not related to the show? Like kind of how did this come about?
The show really gave birth to the Band of Brothers themed tours.
Mhm.
What we noticed was that there was a little bit of a lull. Show premieres in September of 2001. Shortly after the premiere, there's initially some interest, but about 2 years out, people are beginning to express an interest in seeing sites, because when I think back to the time period of, say, 2002, 2003, I remember hearing from the public a lot with questions about, where's Brecourt Manor? They were very interested in Brecourt Manor. They saw it featured in episode 2 of the series. They didn't know where it was. And then they would ask questions like, where did the crossroads action take place? In these places now, there are memorials, there are monuments. They show up on Google Maps. You can find them easily now. But 20 plus years ago, 23, 24 years ago, they were relatively unknown and obscure sites. The interest level began to pick up soon after the series came out. And we were staging tours before that with 2 themes. One was called D-Day to the Rhine, where we would start in London, cross the Channel, experience Normandy, and then follow the fighting in the European theater to Operation Market Garden, then to the Battle of the Bulge, and then we would finish with a cruise on the Rhine River, thus the name D-Day to the Rhine. The other one that we did was simply called Overlord. And that was a very simple and straightforward start in London, cross the English Channel, experience Normandy, and then say goodbye and fly home from Paris. Those were the tours that we were running that would deal with D-Day as a subject matter and a few other subjects as well. But then starting around 2004, 2005, there was enough interest for us to begin offering Band of Brothers themed tours.
Yeah, interesting. Because the show does such a great job of showing all these different battles and places. And I know as I was watching it, as we reviewed it, I did a lot more like searching of maps and pictures, just trying to get an idea of what the real locations are. So it's interesting how that evolved.
Yeah, and it says a lot about that series that
Mhm.
here we are still talking about it 25 plus years later, and people are still traveling to Europe to see the sites where these men fought.
Right.
More than a quarter of a century after the series came out.
Yeah, that and you had some of the actual men come on some of your tours as well, right?
Yeah, well, not for me. I wasn't around early enough for that to happen. I got to know a few of the members of Band of Brothers before they passed. They're all gone now, which is a sad reality that we have to confront with all of these subjects. But I did have a couple of opportunities to travel to Normandy with a few of them. Some of the people that work with me at the company, they spent much more time with the members. I arrived late. I entered the inner circle of the Ambrose world right before the series came out. I went to work for him in 2000, and then the series came out. And because of that connection, I met some of the members. I attended also both of the premiere events, one in France and one in New Orleans. And because of the premiere events, I got to travel with some of the veterans and got to know a couple of them.
Cool.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah, very interesting. Well, let's kind of let me get off the tour bus and I get to my next set of slides here with the first part of our journey. I guess I would divide this up into like 4 segments really. We had Ardborn and Normandy, then we did Market Garden, then Bastogne, the Battle of the Bulge, and then into Germany and Austria. It's kind of the way it kind of divided up, at least in my mind. And that was really cool because I felt like I got to experience and understand each of them so much better. I mean, I thought that was really cool, the coolest aspect of the tour. One of the things that I did beforehand is I had an extra day in London, and this kind of added to my tour. There was one of the tours that I would highly recommend. So I did a walking tour of basically one of the towns near London. It's also where the Churchill bunkers are. And we were actually on the river, and you got to see the memorial of the Battle of Britain, both from the First World War and the Second World War. And the most interesting thing about that and the memorial is that they had listings of the names of all the fighter pilots that defended Britain. And there weren't very many Americans, but the the group that I was shocked about that I didn't really know about and really didn't know as much history because you don't think about it, the Polish.
Yeah.
I didn't realize how significant the Polish army was to the Allies. And so I learned that a lot of Polish fighter pilots fought in the Battle of Britain and, were key to defending Britain. And that these guys took the most risks and were the craziest fighter pilots. I mean, it was so interesting to learn that. I was just like, wow, oh my gosh.
Makes it even sadder that then they're kind of just given up to the Russians after that,
Yep, betrayed once again. Yeah, just the struggle toward nationhood for the Polish people is a fascinating thing that begins with Versailles, only to be then portrayed by the Soviet Union and National Socialist Germany. And we could not have won the Second World War without them. The fact that there are experienced and very effective fighter pilots in the Battle of Britain who are from Poland, that tells you that before the Soviets and the Germans invaded them, they were a world-class, modern, militarized nation with a modern army, a modern air force, and true fighting capacity that was something to be respected. And really, one of the only things that brought them down quickly was the fact that they got ganged up on by two of the most powerful countries in Europe.
That's a tough spot going back and forth. I mean, you're really caught in the middle of two big guys there.
Right.
Not a good spot.
Yeah, I mean, it was crazy. I couldn't believe that, but it's just so interesting. All right, let's get into where the Band of Brothers trained in England, and then we'll get into Normandy. And I thought this was really cool. This is an old manor house, but this is where Sink and the main headquarters was, right?
Right. That was, Little Coat House, and it was the headquarters for 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment. Colonel Robert Sink, commanding the regiment, moved in the regimental headquarters to that facility, and it's a hotel and resort now, and kind of day spa as well. And it's terrific that they preserved the library, which was Colonel Sink's office, and we have the opportunity to go and see those sites.
Yeah, it was so cool coming here and seeing that. And then outside they show kind of what they call a horse stable, where most of the men were stationed in this, and it's kind of a little. When you think of horse stables here in this country in the United States, you think of real large horse stables like you'd see at racetracks or in stables where they raise horses, and these things were really small. I'm just like, wow. And then you see kind of the bunks and what the soldiers look like in those. I thought it was kind of cool, kind of neat. Apparently, there's also another one of these in Georgia. If you go visit the where they train the paratroopers, if you go pre-tour in Europe, but that was cool. And then it talks about the stable right here. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but it's an interesting plaque to it. And then I didn't get a whole lot of pictures of the office area because it's changed so much. But I thought this was a really cool view.
Yeah,
I mean, just
great garden
area. Yeah, I mean, just a really pretty area. And then just some of the things inside this house just shows how historic it was. It'd been there since I think the 1500s, 14 or 1500s.
Mm-hmm. All right.
And had seen a lot, especially the English Civil War. Had a lot of stuff from that in there. There's actually a cool ghost story. So if you ever go there, ask them about the ghost story.
Oh, no.
Yeah, a really cool ghost story.
As long as I don't have to spend the night, I'm okay hearing ghost stories. As long as it's not like a place I'm staying.
I like to think of myself immune to such things, but the day that we were there, Rob, I went into the haunted bedroom, and maybe they had two mannequins in there, and the rest of the tour was off with Bruce, who was the guide on site at Little Coat. I went in there by myself and was kind of looking around, and only then, when by myself in the haunted bedroom, did I notice that I felt like the mannequin was watching me, no matter where I went in the room. So there may or may not be ghost stories, but I nevertheless spooked myself, I think.
Yeah, I didn't get pictures of that room because I was like, ooh, no.
Well, you should take pictures because don't the ghosts come out better on film then you can't see them with the naked
The
eye.
the floating orbs will
Right,
show
you
up.
develop it and get a ghost picture.
Yeah, my dad is the one that really does that. There is a
Mm.
weird photo that he has that we'll talk about some other time where he takes a picture of it and he sees a ghost in the mirror.
Oh no.
And it looked like my grandmother. It's freaky, but that's another story for another time.
Yeah, I guess.
Um,
Wow.
but yeah, and then outside there's a commemorative statue that I thought was really cool that they did. The guy who led that tour of the house also keeps up the statue, which is pretty cool. And then we went into town, and I had to get a photo because I didn't take a picture of the other side of the church, but my photo is on the left. We walked into the graveyard and up to where Richard Winters sat for a quiet time. And Marty tells us the story of how he met this couple who had lost their son and were there putting flowers on his grave. And he met them, and they invited him to stay at their home. And that's how he got to stay at a place outside of the of where the other officers stayed. And I got a picture of the sign, but I forgot to take a picture of the actual place, which is like the post office. But there's a picture of the place, and they recently, like you said, was it 6 months ago that they put up this sign that says this is where Richard Winters and Harry Welsh stayed?
Yeah, the blue sign went up literally, I think, 10 days before we were there.
Yeah.
So that sign was still brand new when we got there.
Mm-hmm. So I took a picture of the sign. And then we went to, you got the option to go to one or both of the taverns for lunch that they stayed at. The officers stayed at and would hang out at the Blue Boar. And there's a stock photo of the Blue Boar because I didn't get a good picture of the front of it, but there's the front of the Blue Boar. And inside the Blue Boar was mainly a tavern, but I thought this was interesting. So a lot of us in our community are Doctor Who fans, and so I kind of went nuts when I saw, hey, there was an episode of Doctor Who filmed there. He even sent these photos to Doomcock. I was like, and he was like, oh my gosh, really? And so they have a marker there in a police box. But I thought this was pretty cool. The Blue Boar had its own kind of club, and you'll see kind of some familiar names. For instance, the Sergeant at Arms is Nixon, and everyone's got a nickname. One of the ones that I thought was funny is Lieutenant Frosty Winters. Yeah. So I think he maybe spent some time with the guys, but he wasn't a drinker, so I don't think he partook, but he's still on there. And then Lieutenant Slim Meehan, and then Lieutenant Light Horse Harry Welch. So I thought that was kind of cool. And I actually ate at this establishment. It was pretty good food and pretty good beer. So
it's hard to go wrong with pub food.
No, it was excellent. It was good. And then the next one is the Crown Inn, and this is where a lot of the enlisted men would go, specifically the sergeants. And it's guarded by a dialect. So I had to take a picture of the dialect. But inside, I couldn't really get some good pictures because there were a lot of people in there, and I don't feel comfortable asking people, hey, can you move out of the way so I can get a picture of what you're sitting behind? So, but it's got a lot of memorabilia of pictures of the men and dedication to the 501st. But it was really cool. You just come into this little town and you get a feel for rural England. And it's much different than the hustle and bustle of London, but still cool nonetheless. And of course, I've got to take a picture of the dialect and send it to everybody, fun stuff. And then we went to the airfield, which has been turned into a park. And I really just got a picture of the memorial and the flags, because really what you see from the airfield is not a whole lot left. It's basically a park, and it's a kind of flat walking land where people take their dogs and bikes and everything. Although the funniest thing was seeing a fire hydrant in the middle of that.
Yeah, and a fire hydrant that was made in the United States of America.
Yeah. So there's a U.S. fire hydrant there for when they shoot. They had the planes and stuff. And unfortunately, folks, I'm sorry, my finger accidentally got into some of these pictures.
I'm not
hold my camera thusly and my finger.
Yeah.
So, But yeah, I mean, it was real cool to see where they took off from, and Marty told some interesting stories. Folks, you got to go on these tours to get this story. But do you want to tell us about General Eisenhower coming out there real quick?
Yeah, the great thing about Greenham Common is that it is an actual embarkation airfield for the D-Day invasion, and it's famously the airfield that General Eisenhower visited around 8 p.m. on Monday, June 5th, 1944.
Mm-hmm.
The seaborne echelon of the invasion was already in ships at sea. He couldn't see them off. They had been on board naval vessels for days by that point. However, the airborne forces, they were departing that night. And so Eisenhower was driven from his headquarters at Suffolk House north to Greenham Common so that he could say goodbye to the troops. And he's saying goodbye to their troops that are not exactly within the broad sweep of the Band of Brothers story, because they're troops from the 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment, when we were following the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment and Band of Brothers. But still, it's an amazing story. And it's a story that we know a lot about now, because a lot has been written about it. And it was also captured on camera because a photographer was there to record the event. And so we have these charming photos of the Supreme Commander talking to paratroopers who they have already geared up. They have already blackened their faces, but they haven't begun putting the parachutes on yet. They're getting very close to that point, and it's closing in on sunset on Monday, June 5th, and they're about to fly to Normandy, and General Eisenhower comes down to say goodbye to them. And you can almost tell in the photos that there's a weight bearing down on him, and it's the weight of the knowledge that many of the men that he was there to say goodbye to that night would not live to see the dawn.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And it's pretty cool that, he told us about the two speeches that he kind of wrote and kind of had to hold on to one on the desk. Yeah.
He wrote the Order of the Day, which famously encourages the men and provides inspiration by saying, soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, the task to which we have striven these many months. He goes on a call to the Great Crusade. It's this very well-respected piece of writing that we remember that because of the triumph of June 6th, but at the time that he wrote it, he didn't know that it would end in triumph. And that led him eventually also to write a handwritten note just in the event that the invasion failed. And that note, in that note, he accepts full responsibility for the failure of D-Day. And it's an interesting study of his leadership style. And I often make the observation that when do you ever see that this day and age in leadership? The person who steps forward and goes, I'm going to take full responsibility for this if it doesn't go well, and it might just be the end of my career. And if that's the case, so be it. If my career has to end, that's what I'm going to do, but I'm going to preserve the honorable stature of accepting the blame for everything going wrong.
Absolutely. And I want to say hi to Lombardi 1969, Herc 130, Sig Valdesen, and 2104 Dogface. Glad all you guys could make it. Now, we went into Normandy. I didn't want to show the boats, and we did tour another museum, but there's so many museum pics that we're going to see here. I decided to go ahead and skip some of that and get directly into Normandy and what you guys want to see. So our first real day in Normandy was Utah Beach, and this is really cool. Very solemn place. A little bit different from Omaha Beach that we're going to talk about a little bit later on, but it was really cool to see the beach, and you could see kind of the different statues that they had and memorials to them. It was really a unique experience seeing some of these things. And Marty told some really cool stories. One of them is about Teddy Roosevelt Jr., whose grave we're gonna see. He's a Medal of Honor winner, and he tells us the story of him coming onto the beach and tapping the back of the colonel and saying, "What do you need to get on the beach?" Which is really cool. And the fact that he did that, the fact that he was able to come with the first wave as a general at his advanced age. I think he was like 56 years old and with declining health was just amazing. So,
Yeah, he wasn't physically strong enough to do what he did on D-Day. The proof of which is that his life would end in July in Normandy because the exertions associated with the campaign were too much for him, and his life is eventually claimed by a pulmonary embolism. And so that was a man who was beyond his prime. He was, I'm not saying that 56 is old because that's how old I am, but he had some physical comorbidities that to anyone else would have been the perfect excuse not to be a part of the first wave. But General Roosevelt, who also could have used his name to get out of being a part of the first wave, could have used his advanced age, his declining health, and he could have used his famous family name to get out of being on that beach. And the thought of that was unimaginable to him because that's where he had to be. Instead of using the opportunities that were available to him to get out of being there, he leveraged his family name and influence so that he could be there. And he paid for that decision with his life because the man wasn't well enough.
Yeah. And it's just a really, really good story of leadership. And I'm so glad that he did that. And, for him to risk that.
The beach pictures are always just so eerie to me. It's just so sobering looking at, an Omaha or Utah beach, just it's so much loss there. I just always kind of get chills looking at pictures of it.
Oh, yeah. So this is in the museum, and it has kind of replicas of tanks and planes.
Boats,
and then
the boats that they kind of hit the beach on, it
Mhm.
looks like.
Yeah, it's nice. You've chosen three great examples. There's an LVT because LVTs, the landing vehicle tract or Amtrak, was used on a limited basis during the Normandy invasion. There's a great example of a Higgins LCVP that was made at the City Park plant in New Orleans in September 43, the one that's inside the building. And then it's kind of hard to not say something about the fact that they've got a B-26. You don't often get to see that aircraft. That is a very rare bird to see. And B-26s flew bombing missions during the pre-dawn darkness of D-Day, and they flew air support throughout the campaign in Normandy. That's a 100-day-long campaign, and during that time period, medium bombers and light bombers were a critical part of the fight, and the B-26 was therefore also critical.
Absolutely. And 2104 Dogface has a question for you, Marty. He's asking if you know Joe Mucka and his tour group.
I do know Joe. He's a friend for many years. I've met him in person a couple of times, but I know him primarily through social media. And he is in his own way an excellent scholar and historian of the story of Easy Company. And he knew a lot of the veterans. He knew more of the veterans than I did, actually.
Yeah. So there you go. 2104 Dogface. Yeah, you guys have something in common. And then it was so cool to see. I'm sorry, guys. I'm a guy. I have to love the weapons. We saw so many different weapons. Some of the pictures weren't as clear because of the glare. But like Marty told us all about these weapons and the different forms of machine guns that they had and that were representative. We're not going to get into it here, but I mean, it's just incredible, the amount of guns. And then I thought this was really cool. They had an example of kind of what it looked like on the beaches with some of the cannons and some of the tunnels dug in. And then if you looked outside the window, they had some of these, I don't know what did they call these? The star type blockers.
Yeah, they're called hedgehogs. They were based on a Czech design that the Germans copied because they found it to be very effective. And there are still some original hedgehogs right outside that window that were on Utah Beach on D-Day.
Mm-hmm. And what did those do? They blocked tanks from coming up, or what was their purpose?
The purpose of the hedgehog was to, without using it in association with concrete, they could be moved easily to form a roadblock. But then if you based them in a concrete pad, you could use them as very effective beach obstacles. Because Normandy has a wide-ranging tide, the Germans took the opportunity of low tide to position Czech hedgehogs by the thousands at the low tide level. so that they were out on the sand flat at low tide, and then at high tide, the water rushed in and covered them. And they were therefore, and in that way, being used as an anti-boat obstacle. The Germans were fully aware that most of the landing boats that we were employing, that we would potentially employ in an amphibious operation, that they were made of wood, and that wooden-hulled boats would not be able to withstand a collision with one of those hedgehogs.
Right. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, so it was cool. And then the armored personnel carrier, which I dubbed the Revenge of the Nerds 2 carrier, because it reminded me of that movie.
The DUKW,
Yeah.
the amphibious truck, Revenge of the Nerds.
Yeah. And then, we, of course, they recognize Richard Winters. And I thought this is a cool painting of the Band of Brothers here. And it talks about the 501st. And we're going to get to Brecourt Manor here in a minute, but it recognizes that action in the museum as well. Okay, so now we get out of the museum. There were a couple other pictures I had in the museum, but, museums have so many different things, and we're going to see so many museums. I want to save some of the other pictures for later, but this is Dick Winters' statue in Normandy. I think he has another one in Gettysburg, if I'm not mistaken, as well.
I think isn't it in Ephrata, Pennsylvania?
Or one of the Pennsylvania. I didn't know if it's Gettysburg or one of those places, but they're two, right?
Yeah, there's that one. There's the one that's right there between Brecourt Manor and Utah Beach.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one, which is a casting from the original sculpture. So it's therefore identical. It's I think it's in Ephrata on the town square. But let me just double check that. I've not visited that one. I see the one in Normandy all the time, but I don't often get to Pennsylvania these days.
Yeah. 2104 Dogface says it's in his hometown. So
yeah, I think that's in Ephrata.
Yeah. And I think he was reluctant to want a statue. He wanted it as generic as possible, really recognizing his men, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he did not want a statue of himself. He didn't want a likeness of himself. That's why initially that memorial was being referred to as the Leadership Memorial. Mm-hmm. And that was because Winters refused the original plan for the statue, or the original plan for the memorial, because it was going to feature a statue of him, and he didn't want that. He instead wanted the memorial to remember the efforts of the small unit leaders who, in the aggregate, contributed to victory on D-Day. People like him, not just him, but people like him, the second lieutenants and first lieutenants and captains who were so instrumental in bringing about turning what was a day gone wrong into a victory by the end of the day. And because of that feedback from Winters, because he rejected the idea of a statue in Normandy remembering just him alone, because of that, they made a change to the memorial, made it the Leadership Memorial. And although that is the official name for it, most everyone just refers to it as the Dick Winters Memorial.
Mm-hmm. And I thought it was real cool with the American flag and the French flag right there too.
Yeah. It's a great memorial too, because it allows us an opportunity to meditate about one of the attributes that I think makes him such an admirable person, and that was modesty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It totally fits the character that came out on the TV show, that he wouldn't want a memorial to himself, that he would want it focused on the rest of the men.
He infamously evaded the spotlight and accolade. If somebody threw something at him that was a compliment, he tended to sort of try to sidestep it, and he'd call in other people. So this whole thing about the memorial, I love the memorial because it provides this opportunity to call attention to the fact that it's a memorial that he didn't want, because it's a memorial that's all about him. And he didn't want it to be all about him. He wanted it to be all about the other citizen soldiers who answered the call, who did their duty, and secured the victory of June 6th.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Really cool.
All right. Now we're in the Brecourt Manor. I think I got it backwards. I think I've got the Meehan's Crash later on, but this is Brecourt Manor. And the cool thing is that we get up there, and it's this memorial here that has all the listing of all the guys who participated in the action. And it's a good tribute to the 501st. But it's still a full functioning farm. So you couldn't get on private property. And Marty told us kind of the whole story. So, folks, Band of Brothers showed it, but I don't think they showed it as accurate as the real story. One of the things that amazed us about, or at least amazed me, was just the amount of foliage and Normandy. I mean, this stuff, I sit there and I've lived in the South and Texas, in parts of Texas that has a lot of foliage and like kudzu and stuff like that. This is just as thick, if not thicker, than kudzu and some of the forests. So really, there were, if Marty, if I'm correcting, they came upon and they put their extra ammo in like a farmhouse, and then they had one field to cross, and then the guns were in another field, right? And then they get into the ditches, right?
Yeah, well, that's one of the big criticisms about the series that often comes up, is that the series depicts World War I style trenches that we know for a certainty were not there. And that calls into question something that I like to point out. And Rob, you might remember me mentioning this probably several times during the tour, and that is that Band of Brothers is a miniseries, and it's an excellent miniseries, and I still love it 25 plus years later, but it's not a documentary. It is based on a true story, and the writers took liberties with the true story from time to time. And in the example of the Brecourt Manor action on June 6th, there were some liberties taken. They couldn't tell that story the way that they couldn't tell it in a way that would be historically authentic, because it would take the entire episode. They had to compress it. They had to shrink events down. They had to change the order and sequence of certain things. And so they make what was a 5-hour long battle look like it was a 20-minute long battle. They skip over the very ending phase of it, where Winters was about to lead an infantry assault on the manor house itself and chose not to, and instead broke contact with the enemy, fell back all the way to a point where he encountered tanks. And he interacted with, they were tanks from 70th Tank Battalion that had landed on Utah Beach and come into the interior. And the tanks then contributed to the final sequence, the closing act of the story of the attack on Brecourt Manor. And I think even that provides a moment of reflection on what a good combat leader he was, because he had fought Easy Company, or really a very small group of soldiers and NCOs from Easy Company, all the way through to the point where if they continued on, the casualties would be much higher. He only has one casualty. He only has one killed that day. He has several casualties. And rather than unnecessarily risking the lives of the men, he falls back to look for a plan B, not knowing that he'll stumble upon 2 Sherman tanks that have just come up from Utah Beach. And the tanks solve the problem without having to unnecessarily endanger the lives of men from either Easy Company or Dog Company, the 2 companies that were there during the action. Yeah.
And so our bus kind of parked over by the manor, and we got a chance to walk around, and you can see how thick. I mean, this is in late May and not that far from June. And 81 years ago, it was probably similar foliage and similar thickness because Normandy gets a lot of rain this time of year. But here's kind of the pictures of the field, the manor itself. And it's interesting to see. I think when you look upon it, you're facing to the right is where Utah Beach and where the guns were, and then to the left of where we stood was kind of where they had a whole bunch of troops stationed, a whole bunch of German troops closer to the manor itself. They were actually shooting as well at them. I think I've got one of the pictures that I think you said was one of the trees that Lipton climbed.
Right. Yeah. It was Lipton and Ranny climbed the tree.
Yeah.
We think it was probably one of the trees that you see in the upper right-hand corner in that photograph. And that you can see the upper part of that tree in the photo
like
below.
Right here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We think that it's one of those trees.
Yeah. Cause Lipton, I think came back here at one point and tried to find the tree he climbed. Right.
Right.
Yeah. But we couldn't go inside the private property and go down kind of the ditches, but I've seen some other videos and stuff. And while it's not a trench, it was probably a good 3 or 4 feet, probably at least.
What develops in Normandy at the base of hedgerows is that they, just for the purposes of ensuring proper drainage, they allow some erosion, some water erosion at the base of the berm upon which every hedgerow grows. And that turns into a ditch. It's just there for drainage. And what we believe created the confusion is that the ditch was there. The guns were pushed up into the hedgerow. We know that for a fact because you might remember I showed some aerial photo reconnaissance images that were taken on June 6th that show that field. And there's no evidence of the guns. You can't tell that the guns are there. The guns have been pushed up into the hedgerow. And I think that the wheels of the guns were pushed up to the point that they rolled down into the ditch at the base of the berm. And the men, therefore, were using that ditch as cover and concealment throughout the battle. And because of that, this amplified rumor began to grow about there being trenches there when there were never actually trenches.
Yeah. So there's a lot of duck and crawling really in this as well.
And what that means is that the miniseries depicts an action where men are into and out of trenches regularly, and the trenches are providing them much more cover and concealment than the ditch that was actually there on June 6th. I think the troopers that were actually there would have loved to have had more cover and concealment, like what you see in the miniseries.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting.
Yeah, and I think Marty even told us the other thing about this that was remarkable is like they take one gun down, but then they have to go refill an ammo, and then they have to crawl across a whole field to get where they left some of their extra supplies of ammo, come back up. This is why this thing takes so long. I mean, it took, 9 to 11 hours?
It's the better part of the day. And then men keep depleting their unit of fire, meaning that they run their individual load of ammunition down to a minimum, and then they have to fall back to replenish ammunition. And that's why it has this quality of they seize gun number 1, seize gun number 2, then there's a big pause between gun number 2 and gun number 3. While they're at gun number 3, after having replenished ammunition, the enemy has rushed into the area and is now laying down much more automatic weapons fire, which slows the whole action down dramatically, only then to have Lieutenant Spears come up with some men from Dog Company, and they take gun number 4. And it's this issue of they just can't carry enough ammunition for a protracted small arms fight. And that means that they periodically fall back, replenish ammunition supply, and then return to the battle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting. You know what? This is Crossroads. Okay. So I forgot to put the Meehan Memorial on here. Gosh, I'm sorry about that. I do have pictures of where Meehan's plane crashed. I forgot to add these on here. They're actually on my, the Medal of Honor heroes. It's on there as well. But we did get to see where that was. It basically is a memorial plaque. I may show that later on if I can pull it up on its own. But we did go into the town or into an area. This basically is where Cole's charge was, and it was on the other side of Carentan. So they were on, I think, is this the north side of Carentan that Cole's charge was on?
That's right. Cole led the charge that he led. They'd staged from the town of Saint-Côme-du-Mont across what was called Carentan Causeway, where there are 4 bridges crossing. You can't say 4 rivers. There's 1 river and then 3 smaller tributaries. He stages them all the way to the Madeleine River, which is the last river that leads to the final stretch into the northern outskirts of the town of Carentan. And Cole famously led a bayonet charge from the banks of the Madeleine River to a farmhouse that was the only house that was out in that area of town at the time. 81 years later, it's the industrial northern outskirts of Carentan. But in 1944, it was the site of Lieutenant Colonel Cole's famous bayonet charge. And there's a lovely memorial there that you can see in that image. And so we stopped by that. I think we stopped and got out and had a closer look at it. And that's partly because then when we go to the Netherlands, we visit the site where Cole was killed, and then we visit Cole's grave.
Yes. Yeah, we did Cole's grave, and we did that. And Cole won or received the Medal of Honor for his actions right here. And the farmhouse, it's hard to see in this picture. I was trying to get a picture of kind of the field to the farmhouse. It's back over here. It's a yellow house, and I think it's 2 stories high.
2-story farmhouse.
Yeah. But it built up so much over there. It was interesting. So that's another aspect of that you don't see in Band of Brothers. And that was another great thing about this tour is we did Band of Brothers, but Marty gave us that sense of the entire war and some other things that were going on besides where the brothers were, which was really cool. And then we did go to a German cemetery, which was interesting. I don't have any pictures from that because I just thought it was interesting that we went. But the other aspect of this tour is we go to different types of cemeteries, different areas, and you get a feel for both sides and get a feel for what actually happened here. And it's a more sense of history, which I think is really cool. And that's why I think Stephen Ambrose Tours does it right and shows you a lot of cool stuff.
I'm glad you think that. That might be me kind of bringing my own personal thing into it a little bit, but because I enjoy visiting military cemeteries. I did it earlier today here in Namibia, by the way. I do it everywhere I go just about. But I really feel like it's important to see these cemeteries and see the way that each country memorializes its war dead, because everybody does it a little bit different. And not to say that somebody does it better than everybody else, but it's to say that the memory of the Second World War is something that's still very much with us, and it reflects kind of the way that the circumstances played out for all sides considered by the end of the conflict, so that the German cemetery has a completely different feel to it than the American cemetery, for example.
Yeah, and it was interesting to do that. I'm so glad we got to go.
Too.
Yeah,
that's
interesting.
Because I frequently get people that get angry for me taking them to a German cemetery, but our crew had sort of the right frame of mind for all of this, and they were up for anything.
Yeah, I was going to say how did the locals look at it and present it differently or feel differently about it, since they were sort of conquered for a brief time and occupied for a time, and now they've got the German cemetery there. Was it looked at the time as something they didn't want there, or kind of wanted pushed aside? Or that would be interesting to me to know what the locals had thought of it earlier, when it was closer to the war.
Well, there's one thing that I never got a sense that the locals had developed any sense of animosity or antagonism toward the German cemeteries. There was a period in Normandy where German prisoners of war in very large numbers were being held at a place called Continental Enclosure Number 1, just inland from Utah Beach. And later in the summer of 1944, after the Normandy battle was over, some Normans developed some bitterness over the fact that German prisoners of war were sleeping in an encampment where they lived in barracks buildings. They had warm food each day, and they had power, they had hot showers, and they had sanitary facilities. Whereas a large number of Norman people, as a result of the war that raged through the part of France where they lived, they didn't have any of those things.
Yeah.
I'm aware of some bitterness developing about that, the prisoners living better than the Norman French did.
Sure.
But I'm not aware of them having any bitterness about the presence of the German cemetery. And I think that's because it was padded. And the way that it was padded was that the German cemeteries now, they were not initially created by the Germans because the Germans were driven off the field of battle. They were created by the U.S. Army, by U.S. Army quartermaster graves registration units. They went in. We had an obligation to bury the enemy war dead. We buried the German war dead in compliance with that international obligation, just like they handled our war dead. And then for years after the war, the U.S. Army took care of it until 1948. We cared for these cemeteries with German war dead that had been created by the U.S. Army. Then eventually we entered into a treaty agreement with the French government, and the Germans would enter into a similar treaty agreement. Although when they do that, it's a complicated time because there's no longer one Germany. There's two Germanys, and they don't get along with each other. But I think that process of the stewardship of the German cemetery initially being American We created that cemetery. We maintained that cemetery for 4 years after the Battle of Normandy. And I think that took some of the sting out of it for the French.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. So the next shot is Omaha Beach. And
Yeah.
I'm so glad we got to go when we did, because we came in at low tide. And folks, the interesting thing about this, one of the most interesting things aside from all the history, was how fast that tide came in. So we were there for like about an hour, and the tide came in. It's like half the beach was gone by the time we left. It was incredible. But here are some of the statues and the sites. The cool thing was just this awesome structure that the Germans had a cannon on in there, and I think I've got a picture of it that you'll see. And Marty told us a story about how that cannon was a decisive force on the beach, that it took out several carriers, and it was like there was one big troop carrier that it blasted 29 times.
Yeah, I think that was, what was the name of that landing craft? LCIL 48, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Got struck by, and so that's, yeah, you can see it through that grating. You can just see the muzzle. Now, that grating was put in just to keep people out of the position, but the muzzle of that weapon would have stuck out 20 feet beyond the embouchure of the opening. But that's a German PAC 8.8 centimeter gun, or an anti-tank rifle. It's the infamous 88 millimeter anti-tank rifle, not to be confused with the 88 millimeter flat gun, but this is one of Germany's most destructive and therefore most dangerous anti-tank weapons. And there were two of them on Omaha Beach, the one that you see here at WN 72, and then almost 5 miles away on the other end of the beach, there was another one just like it.
Yeah, and this is the infamous, this is Dog Green that we were on, right?
That's right, Dog Green. You know, it's funny that came up. I hope I don't get in trouble for you showing this, because we had a fixed itinerary for that day. And as you might remember, we woke up that morning and we were supposed to just go do one or two things and then hit the road, because we had to go to Lille for the night so that we could wake up the next morning and then continue on to the Netherlands. And I cannot go to Normandy without visiting Omaha Beach, even when the theme of the tour is Band of Brothers, even when the theme of the tour is airborne. I still feel this strong urge and almost this sense of obligation to go and have a visit at Omaha. So we had a quick visit, but it was a good one because it was low tide.
Yeah. So yeah, see, this was low tide. This was before the tide came in. The tide came in. If you see this picture right here, the tide, by the time we left, I think a couple of these pillars were already underwater. It was crazy. But my understanding of this, looking back at it later on, is basically we were on the beach and we were just pinned down by, they had the guns back on top of the previous picture as well. And essentially they had to break through further down, come back up and over around, right? And then they took out the guns that we saw, right?
Right. I always point out that Omaha Beach is, don't think of it as one battle, think of it as 5 separate battles, all fighting simultaneously and independent from one another. And the process of getting men off of the beach, across the shingle, across the sand dunes, through the minefield, and then up the bluff, that was a process that did not go according to plan that day. The first element to get off were men from 16th Infantry Regiment, way down at the Fox Green sector, being led by a lieutenant named Jimmy Monteith. You might remember we visited his grave.
Yeah, we'll see his grave. Yeah.
And then Monteith gets some men off. Spalding from 16th Infantry, he also gets some men off the beach and up the bluff in the area where the cemetery is now. General Norman Cota gets some men up the bluff, off the beach, up the bluff. And it's a process of trying to improvise when the plan is going very badly wrong. And the plan goes very badly wrong at Omaha Beach because the men do not land with the support that they needed, particularly tank support. It's a well-known story that the 2 tank battalions, 741st and 743rd, that were to land on Omaha Beach, they dealt with a major complicating factor in terms of the weather conditions were quite imperfect for landing armored vehicles on an open beach, with the result that the infantry goes in without armor support. And because of that, the infantry could easily be pinned down by enemy automatic weapons fire. And then the enemy could use mortar fire to exact a very heavy toll, which is why we have between 800 and 1,000 killed in action on Omaha Beach during the first 2.5 hours of D-Day after dawn, after the landings began at 6:30. And it was mainly because it was infantry being mauled primarily by German mortar fire.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that just, I mean, like not an ounce of cover, and then you're facing someone immediately on high ground. I mean, I can't imagine like a worse place to try to come in, and with no support. I mean, it's just a nightmare.
Yeah, and it was for a brief period of time. Easy for me to say brief. I don't think people that were there would agree with it being brief, but for a period of over 2 hours, just over 2 hours, that was a battle that was being lost. The enemy, I'm not saying that the enemy could have won, but the enemy was in a heavily advantaged position.
Yeah.
Because through the use of automatic weapons fire, they had everybody pinned down to where they really just couldn't move. And then they let the mortars do the dirty work. Overwhelmingly, about 1,000 Americans who were killed on Omaha Beach on D-Day, they're killed as a result of fragmentation from mortar fire, not from automatic weapons fire. So that if you paid close attention to the opening scene in Saving Private Ryan, that scene leaves you with the impression that it's machine gun fire that's doing all the dirty work, that's the fire-breathing dragon that's killing everyone. And that was simply not the case. It was mortar fire first and foremost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is the tide coming in.
Yeah.
And we're about to leave. So more.
We were lucky too. We got low tide and we didn't get rained on.
See, there we go. See there you can see the tide coming in right here. That's that same pier, and now it's underwater. Yeah, and more of this is Pointe du Hoc, and can't go there without seeing Pointe du Hoc. I think it's just cool to just see these blast points. I mean, my goodness. And one of them did my heart good. It was the battleship Texas. So for me to celebrate Texas. And Marty told the story here and about the cannons and stuff. And it's just eerie to see these. I mean, these are just blast points by our guns, our Navy.
Yeah.
I mean,
you get it's great at Pointe du Hoc. It's a combination of, you can find bomb craters from the April 25th bombing raid. You can find shell craters from the preliminary naval bombardment on D-Day, and that ran from 5:45 a.m. till 6:30. And then you can find shell craters that were produced by destroyer USS Satterley that saved Rudder's command post from being overrun on June 7th. All of that is just within the cratered environment of Pointe du Hoc.
Yeah, it just was so cool. And folks, I'm not going to spoil it for you. You need to go on the tour to hear all the stories because they're really cool. But basically, we led a raid to capture these guns, and it was really cool how they got the Navy involved and getting them back and saving these men who took out these guns. But it was really cool. USS Texas.
Is a lot of this land like up Omaha Beach and around here? Is that like national monument land now? Does it belong just to the government, or kind of like a national park where you pay to get in, or can people just wander around there? Like, what's
This is a cool question, Heather, because just to show you how much of a popularized thing Pointe du Hoc was in the years after the war, that when we entered into a treaty agreement with the French in 1948, the agreement whereby they gave us the property where the Normandy American Cemetery is located now, they also included Pointe du Hoc in that. So the Normandy American Cemetery grounds and Pointe du Hoc are administered through the American Battle Monuments Commission, which it has not been directly given to the United States of America, but it's a lease in perpetuity, whereby the United States is technically leasing the property, but we will have it forever. And we are also therefore responsible for taking appropriate care of that property. So that when you're walking around at Pointe du Hoc, you're walking around within the same unit as the Normandy American Cemetery.
Okay.
Yep. And speaking of the Normandy American Cemetery,
here we go.
Yeah. So the cool thing about it is, so first off, they do have some areas roped off to where you really can't go and see. And we were fortunate to have a couple of people in our group who had family members who had passed away there, so they got to go with some patrons to actually visit those graves and have a special ceremony there. But Marty took us up on one of the back ends, and I think this is one of the most important aspects that sometimes gets left off of the tours of this and gets left off to mention. And he basically showed us this area, which is an area where the names of men who passed away whose bodies were not found are on here. And I think it's just so important, not only to remember the people that died there, but the people that were lost. So this would include, pretty much all of Meehan's plane that got destroyed. It crashed and burned up, and I don't think they found any bodies there. So you have them and several other flyers, but all kinds of other people. And we've got pictures of this memorial wall that's just really cool and really solemn. And then I've got an up close picture of some of the people, and there are little dots right next to the picture that I've got. And the cool thing about that is the dots represent somebody whose body was found, and they were given proper burial, either there in France or they had the option of bringing them back home, which is just amazing. One of the things that I thought of when I saw that is like, we got to remember not only people that have graves there, but were unknown or unfound. So very, very solemn, very, very important to recognize them as well.
Yeah, I may have even pointed out Nathan Baskind, who was he was in a tank destroyer battalion. He drove a vehicle into an ambush. He got badly wounded. The Germans captured him. He was still alive. They treated him. He eventually died of his wounds. The Germans buried him in a mass grave site in Cherbourg that was then eventually exhumed, and everyone in the mass grave was moved to an area south of Carentan and buried in this mass grave. And then last year, they excavated the mass grave site, found Nathan Baskind's body. He was listed on the walls of the missing at the Normandy American Cemetery. It was completed in 1961, and they had to go forward with the information that they had in 1961, and that is that he was at that point still missing, although eventually it was known that he was in this mass grave south of Carentan near St. Lo. They exhumed his body last year, reburied him at Normandy American Cemetery. They don't want to change the wall because there are other people who remain missing listed on that tablet. And so they simply mark his name with a rosette to indicate that his remains have subsequently been discovered and he now has a final resting place.
Interesting.
Yeah. This is really cool. And it's cool to see, the flags and the statues in the pond. I thought that was really cool. And then you can just see the mass graves and see that it's right there, right by the beaches.
Wow.
Yeah, the location itself of the Normandy American Cemetery, the French understood that it would carry weight and importance for us as a people because the cemetery site looks down on Omaha Beach. Many of the men who were buried in that cemetery, their lives ended just below on the beach. And the French wanted us to have this picturesque and also spiritually appropriate place for our dead from the Normandy campaign to be buried, because that cemetery, it has burials that date from 1918 to 1947. I mean, and technically, if you want to include Nathan Baskind, you could say burials that date to 2024. But people who fought, who came to France in 1944 to advance the cause of liberation, and they died either before D-Day, on D-Day, or after D-Day, but they died in the liberation of France. And so the French deliberately selected that spot, knowing that it would have a great deal of spiritual importance to the American people, because it's there where we paid such a high price to establish the beachhead in France.
Wow. I didn't realize it was that close.
Yeah, it's right there.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's right there. And then there's the grave of Jimmy Monteith. He's one of the Medal of Honor recipients, and we got to visit so many Medal of Honor recipients. That's why I did a whole YouTube video on them, because we got to see so many of their graves. and theirs are actually marked in gold for them receiving the Medal of Honor, which is really cool. But yeah, this is awesome cemetery. Now, we couldn't walk up to Teddy Roosevelt Jr.'s gravesite because it's one of the ones that's marked off, but with my trusty handy dandy camera, I was able to zoom in as much as I could right there. But the most interesting thing about his that I found out later is that his brother's buried next to him, and his brother actually died in World War I. So they exhumed his remains and placed him next to his brother, which I thought was really cool. But
yeah, he was a pilot in 93rd Aero Squadron in the First World War and was killed on July 14th, 1918. He was previously buried in a cemetery in eastern France, I believe at the Mouzargan American Cemetery. And then when his younger brother dies in Normandy in July of 1944, and the family decides for Theodore Roosevelt Jr. to remain buried in France, the ABMC made the decision to transfer Quentin Roosevelt's remains from eastern France to the Normandy so that he could be buried side by side with his brother.
Mm-hmm. So I thought that was really cool to find that out. But yeah, here's another picture of the cemetery, but then here's some pictures of the beach. So it's real interesting, guys, to walk across this. And it also, Heather, one of the cool things about a lot of these cemeteries is they'll have pictures of what happened near there and how these men died. And right here, it shows kind of a legend of Utah Beach, Omaha Beach, and some of the other beach landings by the British and the Canadian military.
Yeah, I love big maps like that. Kind of show all the movements. It's really neat.
Oh, well, they're coming. So,
big maps are come.
Yeah, that's the end of the Normandy ones. Let me bring up the next set of slides from Market Garden. And I'm so glad we got to see Market Garden because I did not understand. So I understood that it was a failure, but I didn't understand just its significance. And there's a lot more to Market Garden that we kind of uncovered by learning about it. Hold on. Move. Send.
It doesn't hurt at all that when you're studying Operation Market Garden, you get to go to one of the best countries on earth and you get to spend time in one of the best parts of that country in the southern part of the Netherlands, where I don't know about you, but I have a great time every time I get to visit.
Oh, it was beautiful. It's great.
Nice like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was awesome. So this is just on the bus on the way here. And the cool thing is we passed by battlefields for World War I. And, some of the largest battles of World War I were fought in the Netherlands, which is just really cool to just pass by those battlefields.
Yeah, we right before we crossed into the Netherlands, while we were still in France, you might remember that I'm going to get in trouble again for this because I cheat the system and do a little bypass to go through the Somme battlefield. Mm-hmm. And that's because otherwise we would just be driving right by it on the way to the hotel in Lille. Mm-hmm. And I kind of just can't do that either. I mean, the Somme battlefield is a place where over 183 days, about 1 million people became casualties. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the most significant events in human history in my reckoning. And so rather than staying on the highway where you don't see anything, I always ask our driver to get off and drive through the Somme battlefield. And so we did a driving tour. And I hope everybody appreciated it. It sounds like great. You did. And we got to wedge that in before our hotel for the night before we continued on to the Netherlands.
It was fantastic. Yeah. And here are the fields in the Netherlands where we got to see where Easy Company landed. And it was a much easier, softer landing than Normandy. However, there were a few problems with a few of the planes, but and then there's one of the guys from Artur and basically these are what the fields look like. It's really kind of cool. 2104 Dogface has some mentions about some of the Easy Company guys. He says every time any of the Easy guys came back from Holland, they had some great stories as they just loved them Americans, especially paratroopers. Yeah. Southern Netherlands was a lot of fun. And folks, there's a lot there, folks. There is a unique aspect of the tour that we went on that we got to see in this. I don't want to spoil it for you guys because I want you to take this tour, but it's unique to the Stephen Ambrose tour. And honestly, when we at the end of the tour, when people were talking about their favorite part was this part right here in the Netherlands. And folks, it's just amazing. I don't want to spoil it from you. That's why I didn't show any of the pictures from it. I do have some great pictures, but I kind of want to save that for later on because, like, you know, it's so cool and so unique, and it's just Stephen Ambrose that does that aspect of that tour. And to be honest, they've been doing it for several years, and you know, who knows how much longer they'll be able to do that. So, folks, I would encourage you. It's one of the best parts of the tour. Take this tour, go on it. This is kind of my advertising plug for it, but we got to go up through the Netherlands, and it was so beautiful. And here is where Lieutenant Colonel Robert Cole passed away. We see his memorial where he passed. I thought that was so cool to see this. And I thought they did such a great job of marking the pillar there. It was so cool.
Yeah. And what I like about that memorial too is the fact that that memorial was not made by Americans. It was not made for Americans. If you look at the bottom of it, it says "Gesneit für uns." That means that translates as "He died for us." That is an admonition from one generation of Dutch people to a younger generation of Dutch people to remember the sacrifices of Operation Market Garden and remember how Allied troops came to the southern three provinces of the Netherlands to liberate them during Operation Market Garden. So they built that memorial, not us. That's them teaching the history of the Second World War to a younger generation. And that's what I especially appreciate about that site.
Yeah, absolutely. Heather had to let the dogs out, so she'll be right back. But wow, what did that happen? Okay. And then we got to see another person, a private who was killed there, Joe Mann, which I thought that was really cool too. Another memorial that they did for him. So really neat, very elaborate. And the people in the Netherlands, basically they took really good care of teaching their people about what happened in the Second World War. And you're going to see when we go to the cemetery there, they even adopt and take care of the graves of some Americans, which I certainly appreciate. But this is really cool. I thought that it was neat that they have statues and flowers and all kinds of things, and they have a plaque that tells the story of this private that passed away there too. We also, I didn't take pictures of this, but we also actually ate at McDonald's over there, and it was interesting. It was better than the McDonald's here because it felt like we were eating real food and not, oversalted stuff. But then we headed up to Arnhem and the famous bridge. And if you guys have ever seen a bridge too far or know anything about Market Garden, this is the very bridge that they were trying to knock out and didn't quite get there. And then 2104 Dogface says, every September, Easy Company reenacted while at World War II, the weekend at Ike's farm in Gettysburg. Is the vet wasn't there, we would call them at home and toast them. So they would get together and do a toast, and that's really cool. But there's the bridge, and we actually got to walk across the bridge. So there's our group walking across the bridge. And really, Marty, you said that they had rebuilt the bridge because it did get blown up later on in the war.
Yeah, it got knocked out on October 5th, 1944. But the original bridge supports are still there. And a lot of that metal that's in that supports the roadway span, they reused it. They were able to recycle it. So there's still a lot of original bridge there. It's just not all original. And speaking of which, look at the photo I just pulled up on my phone. Look who's crossing the bridge right there.
Yep. There I am.
I got to see that photo, I think.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I mean, it's just really neat to learn about the bridge, and these are some of the supports, and then there's a clock tower. But it was really cool to learn about not only Easy Company and where the Americans were, but where the British were. And the whole plan was to take these three bridges and then get into Germany uh, and be done with the war by Christmas. Unfortunately, it didn't work. However, we did still hold on to 2/3 of the areas that we conquered throughout to the end of the war, which I think was key now that I really think about it, because, and I was going to get into this later on and ask you about this, but had Germany come back and captured some of those bridges or pushed us back, that would have been a significant blow to the Americans and the British as well, right?
Yeah, and in an interesting way, the story of the British 1st Airborne Division at Arnhem, the force of 2 para that captures the bridge site that then surrenders, then the force under the command of General Urquhart around Oosterbeek and the fight that they are engaged in, their story becomes part of the Easy Company story, because Easy Company is eventually involved in Operation Pegasus, which is an operation that that rescued some of the survivors, some of the holdouts from 1st Airborne Division. So in order to understand the Easy Company story, you have to understand everything that happened at Arnhem. Even though Easy Company is not a part of the fighting at Arnhem, at the bridge site or around Oosterbeek, Easy Company is eventually involved in this evacuation operation in the form of Pegasus 1. And so we have to learn more about what happens at Arnhem so that we can learn more about what happens to Easy Company.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of Easy Company, we get back into their story, and this is the 2nd Battalion headquarters, where Dick Winters was stationed after he'd been promoted and took over 2nd Battalion. I think it's what episode 5, where he is typing up all the reports about what happened at Crossroads.
Right.
Yeah. This is kind of the memorial to him here in the famous picture. And this is the actual area where he stood for this picture. And we took several pictures there. And this is some of our group.
Everybody took a photo there. And it's really great that the family, that the location is called Skolenshoek, and the family that owns it, 25 years ago, people would drive by. Some people knew where the photo was taken and would try to find it. It's a little challenging to find it. But eventually that family, they wanted to accommodate visitors, but they also didn't want people walking up right into the middle of the family farm all day long, every day. So they accommodated everything by putting in a bus lane and then this excellent little memorial there. And they allow people to come up and stand in the driveway and pose for a photograph like we did.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So some of our group right here, the pictures that I got, some great folks, some wonderful folks. But it was just really cool to get our pictures taken where Winters was and where he had his picture. Okay, now we're getting into the Crossroads, and this is basically the main marker that marks the action there, right? And then further over, I think, is another marker for where Dukeman was shot.
Well, the legend is that when they originally imagined this memorial, that the star, if you stood in front of it and looked through the star, you would be looking at the spot where Dukeman was killed. Okay. I don't know if that was part of the plan for the memorial or not, but that is certainly something that people say about that memorial. Nevertheless, the memorial is oriented generally in the area where Winters led the initial interdiction assault against the Germans who were directing machine gun fire south from the top of the dike on the southern edge of the Lower Rhine River. And so the battle, in the most general sense, in 2 phases, unfolds right here. Phase 1 is when Winters leads the assault force there in the middle of the night. They carry out the initial attack and then withdraw. And then when the sun comes up, Winters makes the critical decision to lead a bayonet charge from the tree line that you see way off in the distance there. And it's really not so much a tree line as it is bushes along a drainage canal. And Winters leads the bayonet charge from there about 400 meters up to the area where the memorial is located. When he ran up onto the top of the dike, looked across and saw SS Panzer Grenadiers having assembled overnight and opens fire on them.
Yeah. And I think this is more back where the headquarters, or where this is, I think, the house that they were at, right?
That's looking toward Van Dyke, which is where the command post for 2nd Battalion was. The forward command post during the build up toward Operation Pegasus 1.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's
maybe
pretty accurate in the show. I mean, kind of how that looks there compared to some of the other stuff.
You mentioned that, Heather.
It really looks. It looks really spot on, right?
Yeah, and it's to the point that I find when leading these tours, when we get to that site, most people say, "Oh, so they filmed it here," and I have to tell them, "No, they didn't." I think it's one of the greatest accomplishments in location scouting and motion picture history, because the spot where they filmed that, which was in England, the spot looks just like the actual site of the Crossroads engagement.
It really does. That's amazing.
Yeah. And this is the other side where the Germans were, and this is the kind of there's kind of a ditch and almost a bridge like area, like a gate where they had the prisoners right there. But the interesting thing about here that nobody talks about is, like, Winters gets up there with his charge, a bayonet charge, which is like a last resort thing because he thought that they could have easily been overrun. And he gets up there and he throws his grenade, and then the German throws his grenade, and Winters had his taped up and he forgot to take the safety tape off of it, so his doesn't explode. The Germans doesn't explode, and they're sitting there going, okay. And then he just had his gun on his hip and just started firing. But it's just interesting that neither grenade went off. And then he and his men are able to capture this many Germans. I mean, to me, Marty and I and the group were talking about this, and I think this is more significant than Brecourt Manor. And I felt like he might have deserved a Medal of Honor for these actions because they capture and kill so many troopers here that, it's just amazing. And really, and thinking about this, I want to ask Marty about this. Had these troopers overrun Easy Company, not only would we not have a whole story about Easy Company, but that would have spelled really bad news for the island itself and for taking a significant portion of the Netherlands back for Germany, right?
Well, it would have been bad news for Easy Company, the entirety of the 2nd Battalion, because this German attack was positioning itself to overrun the 2nd Battalion 506 Forward Operating Command Post. And if they'd done that, that would have created disorder, and that disorder would have had the consequence then of meaning that there weren't Americans in position to help get elements of the British 1st Airborne Division across the river in Operation Pegasus 1. So it would have been bad news for Easy Company. It would have been bad news for the survivors and the holdouts of 1st Airborne Division, because there would have been no one there to rescue them and bring them back across the river.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So anyway, further down, this is actually the mark in the spot where Operation Pegasus was done. Mm-hmm. And I think we even drove by where Major Horton was killed near the railway station. So
yeah, I drove by there. And there's the British cemetery. Love that one.
Yeah. So here's the British cemetery. And I thought this was unique because Heather, the cool thing was their gravestones. And I got a couple pictures of basically each of the gravestones kind of represents a different aspect of the military, what they served or what they did. Which is really, really cool.
Yeah, those are really unique looking carvings on there.
Yeah, you see the circular inscription at the top. That's what they call their cap badges, so that every unit, it had every branch of service, whether you're Air Force, whether you're infantry or armor or armored cavalry or engineers, you would have a different type of cap badge.
They're nice
identifying not just your unit, but also the branch of service. And then these headstones in the Commonwealth war grave cemeteries, they can be customized and personalized in a way that's very interesting, so that you have a little epitaph that's at the bottom on the face of each one. And it provides a very nice personal touch in the cemetery that you just don't see in other cemeteries.
Yeah, there's so much more detail and it's so much more intricate. It's nice.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so some of these are interesting that they tell about some of the people. Some of the stories are really sad that we got to see. Forever in my life, memory, darling, you will be missed. My heart is broken, but we will meet again. Stuff like that. It was just brutal, but
yeah, so sad.
Yeah. Then we get to the museum. And we'll talk more about this tank because some of us are on it at the end here. But this is another one of the cool museums. And one of the keys, if you see a bridge too far, they say, bring up the Piet. Well, one of the first things that Marty showed me is, hey, there's a Piet right there.
It's a great display of a Piet too.
Yeah, I just like, hey, there's a Piet, yay! But of course,
what's its significance? Just a larger caliber, or what? Why? I would
So
just the line.
The Piet, and that's an acronym that stands for Projector Infantry Anti-Tank.
Anti-tank, okay.
Yeah, it provides airborne light infantry because all airborne forces are light infantry. Because they're light infantry, they don't often have the type of firepower that can stop enemy armor. And that would lead everyone to come up with some mechanism that would give airborne light infantry the ability to knock out tanks. For the Commonwealth forces, they use the Piet, which, although people make fun of it all the time, it was an extremely effective anti-tank weapon at very close ranges. At longer ranges, it was not particularly effective. And in fact, the force of the 2nd Battalion of the Parachute Regiment that captures the bridge site at Arnhem and holds it for 3 days and 4 nights, they were able to hold on only as long as they have ammunition for their Piats. When the Piat ammo runs out, they get overrun because they can't stop the armor anymore.
Right. And you see, it reminds me of an earlier episode with Easy Company. I don't know what the American version of it is called, but where the tank's coming and they're trying to set up and hit the tank, and it's like, looks like it's right in their face. I can't remember which episode that happened in.
I think that's episode 3, Carentan, because it's depicting a team using the weapon that's called the M1A1 anti-tank rocket launcher. We all just call it bazooka.
Yeah.
And Heather, 2104 Dogface is also mentioning that you can launch beer cans pretty far with them too.
An effective beer projecting weapon.
I'm sure that's fun. Just, full ones or empty ones. If someone needs one, like from across the field, like, hey, throw me a beer.
Give a beer to somebody.
Launch it.
Yeah. So some other things in this museum, obviously the guns, then you got mortars and uniforms. The cool thing about some of these museums is that you see a lot of these guns and different things on display that you wouldn't necessarily see in some American museums because they're a little bit more, I guess, they're not as open with some of these weapons. It's a kind way to put it, but it was just really cool to see the different uniforms and the different things, and you get a sense of the British military really through here. And I know some of our the members bought souvenirs in this area where it's a British T-shirt. But here's the ending of the museum and the tank again, and there's all of us on the tank, which I thought was really cool. Was this a British tank as well?
It's an American-made Sherman tank that was being used by the British. So yeah, it's an American-made short 75. As I recall, it's a welded hull short 75 M4A3 with duckbills for added traction, with applique armor, with non-welded pistol port. It's a very nice example of a mid-war Sherman tank. And what makes it a particularly nice example is it's an example that we can climb on. So we took that opportunity and did it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Oh, yeah. Folks, anytime I can climb aboard a tank, I'm going. It was really cool. It was pretty easy to get up, too. So, but then we've got some of these cemeteries, and I've got to show you some of these. These are great. We went to Margarden Cemetery, which is the Dutch cemetery. And so the thing about the Dutch cemetery that I think is great is the families have passed down for generations adopting soldiers and putting flowers on their graves. And we saw a family go and do this and have their own ceremony. And it was just really nice to see. I even, as we're passing by some of those families, said thank you to them because it's so kind of them. They don't have to do that, but they appreciate so much what we did for them that they want to pass it down for generations. And some of the things on these cemeteries they're written or great. But here you go, Heather. Here's the maps.
That's very nice.
And so the cemeteries would have these just elaborate maps. And I thought these were just fantastic. I mean, I could spend all day looking at these things. But it just shows kind of the progression of the war and different units. It was just really cool. And it had more than one map. So
those maps
really
are
cool stuff.
They're such good maps.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so easy to explain stuff. And then I love this for each for his own memorial, earn praise, never die, and with it the grandest of all scriptures that not in which his mortal bones were laid, but home in the minds of men. But just very solemn and wonderful things. And here's a little bit more of the grave sites. And we were fortunate to be able to lay flowers at some of these graves. You've got Robert Cole, and there's Dukeman, and I actually laid the flowers at Dukeman's grave, which was really cool, very solemn. We actually got to see these graves up close, which is really cool. There's Major Horton, and another Medal of Honor recipient, George Peters. And if you watch my video on Medal of Honors, you'll learn more about him. Which is I think
I put the flowers out on Peters because he was the 507th, and my first book was about 507th. And although that's not a part of the 506th Easy Company story, he's right there. I'm not going to go there and not visit George Peters. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. His story is very interesting. Then we get Raymond Schmitz and James Dill. And then Robert Van Klinken and Maurice Rose.
Right. Yeah. General Maurice Rose, commanding 3rd Armored Division. Yeah.
And then we're to the other cemetery, the Henry Chappell American Cemetery. And the cool thing about this is right across the way, there was just an amazing site. So you had the cemetery back over here, and then you cross the street and you go and overlook this amazing valley. And I couldn't get enough pictures of this beautiful, incredible valley. I mean, just look at all the green.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just amazing. And I took a couple pictures here. We'll go through some of them here. But yeah,
it's nice to see photographs of green. I've been here in Namibia for about 3 weeks, and there's none of that here.
Yep. We're getting a little bit too much rain in Texas. If you heard about the awful floods in the hill country, so we're pretty green right now. But yeah, look at that. I mean, just these different farms and farmland. It's just so gorgeous and so pretty. But here's yet another map there, Heather, for this cemetery.
That's a cool one too.
Yeah. So it's another cool one. There you go. There's
Lombardy 1969 is asking where Muck and Pancala are buried.
Oh, we're gonna get to them. They're in the Memorial Cemetery, and the picture I've got them side by side. So
okay, cool.
We'll get to them.
That's a really cool map.
They're not side by side in graves, but I put their gravestones side by side so we can talk about them if we want to. But
that's a really cool map right there.
Oh yeah. This was so cool. I mean, like I said, I could stare at these things for hours. So that's why I got a picture of them. But yeah, here's another where I'm not going to leave it up so much, but it just talks about the battles and things around that, the Ninth Army, and then different things here. And then in proud remembrance of the achievements of her sons and humble tribute to her sacrifices, the memorial has been erected by the United States of America.
Should say sons and daughters.
Yeah, it should, because we had a female that whose grave we saw in one of the cemeteries as well. So Richard Hughes and Clarence Rao are two of the ones that we saw. And then I went over because one of my friends' grandfathers, Captain William Felkins, is buried there. Oh, wow. And so I got a couple pictures of his grave and sent them to my friend who had visited his grandfather's grave about 15, 20 years before. But just really cool opportunity to see these graves and to go into the Netherlands. Okay, let's get to Bastogne and kind of the cool stuff here. Give me a moment here as I regroup this. So, folks, they only let you do this sharing with. Oh gosh, hang on. Where did my? Okay, there we go. There's Bastogne. Okay. It only lets me, it won't let me pull them up as slides on StreamYard. So I have to do like a share screen. So
Yeah.
So that's why I have to keep going back and forth. And that's why I'm so glad I divided this up, because it's easier to do.
Yeah.
But we're getting to the Bastogne. And the coolest thing was the 101st Airborne Museum in Bastogne. I could have spent hours here. It was just awesome. And one of the cool things was some of the weaponry. So Marty told us about one of the smaller cannons. You want to tell about the cannon real quick?
Yeah, what you're looking at there is an example of the M1A1 75 millimeter pack howitzer. This particular example was made by General Electric back in the day when General Electric used to make cannons. But the M1A1 75 millimeter pack howitzer seen here is on the M8A1 carriage, which is an airborne compatible carriage. The weapon could be disassembled, placed in parapacks, carried in drop bundles beneath the C-47 transport aircraft, and it could be dropped during an airborne vertical envelopment operation, as such that paratroopers associated with the Parachute Field Artillery Battalion, once reaching the drop zone and getting out of their parachutes, they could then retrieve the parapacks that the gun was packed into, reassemble the gun on the drop zone, and begin laying down artillery fire right there on the drop zone. And this was done very successfully during Operation Market Garden in the area around Oosterhout, which is the area where the 82nd Airborne Division landed. And the 82nd dropped the 376th Parachute Field Artillery Battalion using examples of this weapon. And using that weapon, they helped beat back an enemy counterattack against the drop zone on the first day of the operation.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And also, these weapons were a part of the siege of Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so outside you had another cannon flak, but inside you had news clippings, actual pictures of Bastogne, which is kind of
great
cool.
Photos in that museum.
Oh yeah, amazing photos.
Photos are cool.
And then the other good thing was this is actual Patton's jacket, gloves, boots, and one of his sticks. And then there's a picture of Patton. We talked a little bit about Patton at his grave, which we'll see coming up, but we didn't talk about him a whole lot. I mean, I still think it's significant that he was able to make it up there in 2 days and help relieve the airborne troops who basically felt like they didn't need Patton to rescue them, but
they did. They needed it bad.
Oh yeah, they did. And yeah. I agree with that. And, the other thing that I thought was interesting, Marty, is that, originally Market Garden, the tanks were supposed to be all the way to Arnhem in about 2 days and couldn't do it. But yet Patton is able to do this in 2 days, which I found interesting.
Yeah. And part of why the reason that success is possible is because there's one definite thing that he had, and that was instincts that the Army had bred into him from the beginning. And his instincts told him that when the Battle of the Bulge began, he had a feeling that Third Army would be ordered to join that fight. And even before receiving the order to join the fight, he anticipated it and began to pull elements of Third Army off the line and get them ready to move. Mm-hmm. Which is probably something that if Eisenhower, or if Bradley or Eisenhower had known that he was doing that, they would have told him to stop, because that would clearly signal to the enemy that we're about to move, a large unit is about to leave this one area. But he did it, and by the time that they figured it out, it was too late, and he was already committed, and he had been ordered to move north into Luxembourg to join the fight. And if anything, I think what it proves that he's one of the greatest soldiers that the U.S. Army's ever created, and he had good instincts.
Great tactician, and he had that not just guts, but the not caring about what, I'm right, and whatever the consequences are, kind of to hell with it attitude, right? Like
There was a public persona associated with George Patton that people seemed to not be able to get enough of, especially after the movie came out in 1970, because George C. Scott played a better George Patton than George Patton ever did.
Oh yeah, his kids
Yeah.
even said that. We actually reviewed it on Doomcock's channel last week.
Oh, did
So
you?
Heather and I were part of
Yeah.
that. So,
Such a great movie. But
yeah.
another example of this is a movie, not a documentary.
yes. Yeah. So it was just really cool. All these pictures in Bastogne, in the museum were really cool. They had a lot of dioramas of the men and what life was like. I thought was really cool. They even showed the Germans.
Yeah.
And you had a lot of this, and then you had actual weapons that were found. The other cool thing that they had were, elements of stuff that they would eat or that they had. So you have different kinds of beers. Here's your Hershey bars.
Yeah. Stuff that was in their packs or
Yeah. Coffee,
cool.
milk. It was interesting. And then more photos. And see, here's some more stuff. Soap. It was just
Is
kind
there
of
a
cool.
shaving kit in there?
A what?
A shaving kit?
Yeah. Yep. Got to keep nice and clean.
Yeah. Colgate.
Yep. And then, of course, the guns. I can't get enough of the guns.
Well, it's always so helpful to have a weapons display like that, because I find that people that don't really know the firepower that well, they'll watch Band of Brothers and they'll have questions about examples of firepower that are being used. And right there, to me, as an educator, it's super helpful to be able to point out, this is the Thompson submachine gun. There were two models during World War II, this model and that model, and start talking about technical details.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was really cool. That was a lot of fun to learn that. And then, of course, helmets and other gear. I mean, wow.
How easy were those guns to maintain with, but you got mud and snow and weather, and were they pretty just sturdy and not a lot of work, or did they have to kind of keep them clean and
basically every firearm that the United States used during World War II, you could make it fail. If you neglected it long enough, it would fail on you. Even the legendary M1 rifle, which is a superlative of dependability and ruggedness, you could make it fail. And a problem that was experienced with it periodically was that's a firearm that you use grease to lubricate it rather than oil. And so the type of grease that was being used at the time, when exposed to extremely low temperatures, that grease would turn into a sludge and it would freeze the gun to the point where it didn't function the way that it was supposed to function.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
But
a thick grease, more solid.
If you caked on too much grease in cold weather, you might experience that stoppage. Or if you oiled it and then you were in weather where it rained on you a lot, you would lose all your lubrication because the water would wash the lubrication away. So the U.S. was very well known for having firearms that were either designed by John Browning or John Garand. And those men, they didn't design garbage. They designed firearms that did very, very well under battlefield conditions. But even with that, enough neglect could make one of the weapons fail. And another thing that I like about that museum is that it's got both examples of the Thompson submachine gun on display. And you see both examples. You see one example of the Thompson submachine gun in the series Band of Brothers. It's the M1A1 Thompson. You see Garnier carrying one. You see Lieutenant Spears, ultimately Captain Spears, carrying one. And when in reality, the real Spears carried a different version of the Thompson, designated M1928A1. It shows up in all the photos, so that even during the Battle of the Bulge, he has the earlier model, the M1928A1. The series, it had to make do with what weapons were available, so it didn't get that exactly 100% right. Nevertheless, it's kind of nice for both examples to be there on display for me to reference when I'm talking to people at the museum.
Yeah. And the other thing, Heather, do you remember the second episode where Buck Compton is going to the trench at Brecourt and his machine gun jams?
Yeah.
Well, I'd heard the story. It's almost based on apparently, according to Buck, somebody who said Buck Compton told the story that he had gotten that machine gun off of a soldier that had been wounded in the leg and didn't have any use for it. and he gave it to Buck, and Buck didn't fire it or didn't do anything with it until they got to Brecourt, and then it jammed on him. So,
yeah.
But anyway, the other cool thing is you had some sayings from Patton that they have there, and there are a couple of these here that I thought was really cool. Unfortunately, with the glare of the light, I couldn't get the top one as well as I thought, but it's just always cool to hear Patton's quotes. And of course, that opening monologue in the movie is just great.
Best movie opening of all times. And it's a shame it never actually happened. Patton had his stump speeches that he would give, his like blood and guts, get people fired up speeches. But the one in the movie that you see, it draws from a couple of different speeches, but that's not something that actually happened, where he's presenting in front of a gargantuan 50-foot long American flag.
Yeah. But the interesting thing about that speech, and the two things about that speech that they filmed, is that they basically had to lie to George C. Scott, because George C. Scott didn't want to do that at the beginning of the movie, but they told him it was going to be at the end. So they lied to him to get him to do it. And then the other thing is they got his actual pistols for that shot out of the museum and New York for it. So the actual pistols are only in that scene. They had replicas for the rest of it, but they got his actual pistols for that scene, which is really cool.
Maybe that's why George C. Scott turned in such an amazing performance. The spirit of George Patton was in those pistols, and they transferred into George C. Scott.
Yeah.
George C. Scott had a much better voice than George Patton did.
Oh yeah, apparently Patton's voice was very, very high pitched, which is why he would cuss all the time.
Right. You got to compensate.
I have to admit that one of my favorite lines in the movie Patton is he's got some of the chaplains, and they go, "We're surprised that you have a Bible next to your bedside. How often do you actually read it? How often do you read it?" And he goes, "Every GD day." That's so Patton. So. But here's the organization chart of the 101st Airborne, which I thought just was really kind of cool to see that. But this next photo is just where I camped out, and I basically cornered Marty at this thing. And I've got 3 different shots of this, but Heather, this map was amazing, and Marty basically explained almost the whole Battle of the Bulge to me. Right here.
I think we were there for 3 days over the map talking about it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So
wow.
I think this is a better view of the map, but like what Marty was telling me was that the 506, this is where Easy Company was. But if you look, 501st, 327th, back over here is the 502nd. So I mean, yeah, they were defending a relatively big area, but everybody was defending large areas. It wasn't just them.
Right.
And we hear about Nixon waking up and telling the general that he did a walk along the lines and couldn't find the 501st. And part of that was because Easy Company and Dog Company were a little bit out of position, and they had to redo their lines. But, Marty, I wanted to just explain, some of this on the map. I mean, it was just incredible what you told me and how you told me how this map looked. I think I got one other picture there we go.
Yeah. What I love about that is it gives the best teaching point of all on that is you get to discuss the way that various elements of the 101st Airborne Division and elements of 9th Armored Division and 10th Armored Division and other supporting units, they all rushed to Bastogne. They did so under great haste and duress. They got there as fast as they could. And when the 101st begins arriving on the 19th, they start feeding units out onto the perimeter, the line around the city, and units are moving into their positions and taking up those positions in the middle of the night in the bleak midwinter. And of course, and none of these men had ever been there before. And so, of course, as they rush into this strange and foreign city, and then under the cover of darkness, they're sent out to positions along the line out in the countryside surrounding the city. Of course, there are going to be mistakes that are made. Of course, there will be asymmetries. They don't form a perfect line where everyone locks in on their flanks with the unit next to them. There are gaps. There are problems. And that's why we have this incredible moment to discuss and to contemplate how Easy Company eventually has this 1,000-yard move across to the other side of the highway after initially taking up positions in the Bois Jacques upon arrival on December 19th. But then they have to move because this process of trying to straighten the line and turn it into an actual coherent line, it leads to a lot of juggling of units. And that's something that's depicted in the series.
Yeah, and it's something that we don't talk about with Nixon and why he was so key to the unit is that he was one of the officers, one of the intelligence officers that would go out and walk the lines and understand where the positioning was, understand where the enemy was, and so he could report back and so they could get him right. And it was a key position and a key aspect of the story that I think gets overlooked at times because everybody focuses on his drinking habits. And he was there's a reason why he was promoted so quickly to an intelligence officer. And that's part of the reason why. But on this map, I believe, so you got the back up here's where Easy Company was, you have the rest. And you said over here is where the Germans had started to break through and we stopped them. And that's where we had the nuts.
On the side through the line, right?
Yeah. Nuts. And then is it Patton that comes up here from the south?
Patton comes up from the south. It's elements of 37th Tank Battalion, 4th Armored Division that come up through Assinois and then eventually reach the southern part of the perimeter around Bastogne late in the afternoon on the day after Christmas, marking the end of the siege. So that siege, the enemy makes contact with the perimeter around Bastogne pre-dawn darkness of December 19th. The enemy has surrounded the city by the 22nd, and the city is surrounded and under siege until the 26th. When 4th Armored Division approaches from the south. And the series makes, at the conclusion of, I guess that's episode 7, the series is saying it advances this idea that to the men of the 101st Airborne Division inside the perimeter, they didn't need to be saved by Patton. Oh, yes, they most certainly did, because first of all, it wasn't just the 101st Airborne Division. There were about 11,000 Americans in the perimeter. Most of them, almost 8,000 of them are from the 101st. But then you also have elements of 9th Armored Division, 10th Armored Division, and a number of other attached units that are non-airborne. And they're all in there. They're all surrounded. They're all in it together. And then eventually on the 26th, when 4th Armored Division comes up from the south and opens a corridor to Bastogne, that corridor can then be used to reinforce Bastogne and then, more importantly, evacuate wounded who were not being evacuated heretofore, to bring in supplies and to bring in more ammunition. But those are things that were not flowing into the city until Patton got there. I don't want to say it like that. Until the 4th Armored Division reached Bastogne, no casualties were being evacuated, no supplies were flowing into the perimeter. And that perimeter could not have lasted much longer under the weight of the enemy attacks.
Yeah. And then the other aspect of this is the weather was so bad, and then it finally cleared up. And folks, when we were traveling around Bastogne, Marty told us that, the roads were so icy and the different areas were so icy that the German tanks couldn't really get around. But when that weather cleared up, had Patton's tanks not gotten there, they might have been in some serious trouble because the weather was helping them also.
Yeah. And then when the skies cleared, it more importantly opened up our use of tactical and strategic air power to support the ground operations.
Absolutely.
Which from December 16th, when the battle starts, until December 23rd, when the skies clear, we have limited use of air power, and that was our trump card. That was the great force multiplier that Allied forces had, and for it to be taken away from us at the critical opening phase of the Battle of the Bulge, so that caused pain.
Yeah, and I want to mention this other aspect of the Battle of the Bulge. It's so key because had we Pat not gotten there and we'd lost all this, Germany would have at least. The whole goal of it was to split the American and British forces, right? And so it would at least, at bare minimum, prolong the war probably for another 6 months to a year, probably, or even more than that.
It could have done that. It could have prolonged the war. I think more importantly, what it could have created was a situation worse than what actually happened. What Germany was hoping to happen was to use a sudden victory and a recapturing of Antwerp as a means for entering into negotiations with the Western Allies toward an armistice and maybe a peace treaty. They understood that they couldn't communicate with the Soviet Union about that was not an option. And so they thought that if they leveraged a surprise attack through the Ardennes, that it would open up this possibility for negotiations, not to end the war, but at least begin the process of discussion with the Western Allies, which is exactly what Germany ends up doing. Because if you know the way that the war ends, there's a reason why we recognize both May 7th and May 8th as VE Day. And that's because the Germans reached out to the Western Allies first, knowing better than even wasting the time to reach out to the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Which is why we had to have a surrender in Reims at Eisenhower's headquarters, and then another surrender ceremony the next day in Berlin itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that the Germans were hoping to get that in December rather than in May 45.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
2104 Dogface mentions the Filthy 13 who jumped in as Pathfinders. Guys, read up on them. That's a whole nother topic, right?
Yeah, and as I recall, we didn't have much time to talk about the resupply drops that occurred that provided critical ammunition and medical supplies to the Bastogne perimeter.
Yep.
Once the skies cleared, yeah.
Yep. And there's General McAuliffe and another view of that same tank in the middle of Bastogne. So pretty cool. All right, let's talk about Easy Company. So they had this real cool memorial over by where the battalion headquarters was. It talks about all the people that died there, and you've got all the familiar names: Julian, of course, Hubler, Webb, Monk, and Piccala. Jackson, Eugene Jackson's there, but he didn't die till a little bit later on. But
that's why there's an F after his date of death, because he dies in France. He dies at Hagenau.
Yep. F for France. Yep. So that was cool. And then we get into the kind of the woods, and this is the action that we were talking about with Nixon finding out that they were out of position. And that's, Marty told the story of the German coming in, and Winters seeing him. Winters is shaving. He sees this German coming in. And basically after that, he sends out a patrol. And this is the patrol that goes out. Remember, Doc Rowe is told to stay behind on the patrol. And they go right down this area here. And then up this way where some of our folks are hiding is where the Germans were. And Julian gets killed. And it's really a unique forest. The cool thing about this forest is basically it's used for forestry, and they grow up the trees and they cut them down. They grow them up and they cut them down. So
it would be really disorienting though when that's all covered with snow and you're trying to keep your position. Yeah, and
the cool thing though is there were some lumber right here, and you even see it in Band of Brothers where they were able to get behind. But yeah, this is where kind of the area where they had the headquarters for the battalion.
That's Halt Station. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then Marty took us to the real place where the Foxholes were. Now, guys, there's a place there that we drove by that is a pay-for field where it's got turntables and stuff like that. And that's just basically actors reenactment. Marty took us, these are the real ones, and you're about to find out 100% why in a minute. But most of these are actually blast points because the actual foxholes are 80-something years old, and there's barely any sign of it. But they're blast points where they were shelled because it's hard to regrow trees in something that's further down in the ground rather than up here where the normal tree line is. But I see a blast point there. There's another one right here. But yeah, this is kind of the forest area that you could see. And
I pointed out a couple of spots where you can see foxholes that have not been disturbed in 80 years. They're very faint, but you can still see them. There's a reason I don't like going into the Bois Jacques. The Bois Jacques it's important. I think it's less important in the Easy Company story than the foxholes that are in the area of the Bois de Fazon and the Route Madame on the other side of the highway. Because that's the area where Easy Company was when Easy Company was shelled on January 9th and January 10th. They were shelled also earlier than that. That's also where Easy Company kicked off the January 13th, 1945 attack on Foy.
Mhm.
And so the Bois Jacques, while it's important to the early story when Easy Company is at Bastogne during the siege, but for this later phase in January, the other side of the highway, the woods that you're showing right there, those woods I think are more important. That's why I prefer to go there.
Yeah. And folks, there's an amazing story which tells you a little bit more about Muck and Pincala and some of the conspiracy about them. And he also tells you the key portion of Foy. And I don't want to give it away because you've got to go on this tour to hear it, because it basically clears everything up. And Marty and I actually sat down and kind of pieced a lot of it together. And we found out that a lot of the area that got shelled was 2nd Platoon, and we found out why. Also found out recently that George Les Jr. was on a YouTube podcast talking about his dad, and his dad actually dug up Muck and Pincala's bodies. So they did not get completely blasted like it makes it out in the show, but there's a little bit more to it that Marty will tell you about if you go on a tour with them. I don't want to give away all his stories on our show here, but here's more.
The series is entertainment. It's not a documentary, and they took a lot of liberties with the story. And in the example of Muck and Pincala, they took liberties.
Yep.
Oh, what's that laying here on the ground?
Yeah. Now, so we're walking back to the bus, and two of the guys in front of me, they were just out of college. They stumble upon this, and they're like, Rob, you got to take a picture of this. And then they call over Marty, and they say, hey, wait a minute, get off the bus. You got to see this. That is a live shell. That's a live shell.
When I walked up, my first words were, don't touch it, as if anyone needed me to tell them that.
Well, you never know about people.
Yeah.
You never know. That's true. You never know who's going to grab it.
Yeah. So that's what, an 88?
Now, I think it's a 105 millimeter howitzer shell, because the Germans used a 105 howitzer just like we did. And that's what that shell looks like to me. It's not 88. It's too small.
Yeah.
And it was very obvious that somebody had been metal detecting there. Somebody got a big hit, and you can even see the hole where they dug down. They pulled that out, and then they just left it there and walked off and kind of treated it as not my problem anymore. And just for the record, Rob, I was there 10 days later after this. Well, 2 weeks after this, it was still sitting right there.
Oh,
it could be there. Yeah. I let a couple of people know it, but nothing has gotten done about it, or at least nothing had been done about it as of a month ago.
Okay, well, I'm glad that we put sticks around it to mark it.
Who owns the land there in that forest?
Yeah,
it's privately owned, and I think people don't go up into that part of the woods often.
Okay.
People are going and spending the money to go through the turnstiles and go into the Bois Jacques, but they're not going there. And so the shell is still there.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So 2104 Dogface has something funny to say, because he knew Wild Bill. He said anytime someone said they were going to visit the woods, Wild Bill, he would ask, great, if you can find my leg, that would be great.
Oh, God.
That was awesome. Yeah, somebody dug that up, and we're sitting there going, what on earth?
Oh, man.
And there's another shot of it.
Yeah.
I just, I hear the close up. I mean, look at that. I mean,
jeez.
And it's got all the mud in it, but I mean, that thing, you touch that thing, it still could go off.
Yeah.
So, and just to give you an idea, I mean, that pine cone is not a small pine cone either.
Yeah, that looks really big.
Yeah. So, but yeah, you can see where somebody kind of dug it up right there. So. All right, and then here's so it's all private land, and it's fenced off, and there's cattle in that area too, but this is where their attack on Foy. This is where they ran down the attack on Foy, which Marty tells you a story of what really happened, and he will tell you a story about just what happened to Dyke and what really happened with Dyke and why Spears makes his run. There's some real key elements to it that you've got to hear from him. And I don't want to spoil it because I want to save it for a tour because it's so fascinating and so interesting. This is part of the reason why you go on these tours. You learn about the real history and you see the real site. But yeah, this is from the bus looking into Foy. And then back over here's the other side of the bus where the original tree line was. And then another shot of Foy. Oh, there we go. There's the tree line. There we go. Right there. This picture on the right. So the original tree line was right here. It's been since cut down because, like we said, they use trees and they forest trees.
Right.
I mean, I wish we could go on that land, but it's privately owned, so it's hard to do. Then we get into Foy, and you guys remember the sniper?
Oh yeah.
So this is where the sniper was.
They haven't really fixed the exterior of that house either. You can still see where it took them.
I'm worried about that. So when I was there 2 weeks after this trip, the house in the foreground, the house that Shifty was leaning against when he took the shot, they're renovating that house.
Okay.
And the person who owns it came out and the whole group was there. He's really quite rude to us about get away from our houses, get away from our houses. When nobody was touching his houses, they were just taking photos of it. And I'm worried that something's going to be done to renovate that barn.
Yeah, probably.
Oh, wow.
And that side of it has all that bullet damage in it from the Battle of the Bulge. And I didn't get the impression from the owner that he was a big Band of Brothers fan. So
Was it like get off my lawn, grumpy old
it was kind of that. It was kind of a like get away from my house. Like one person had stepped up to get you see the house that's under renovation. You can see the work going on there. And so we weren't even stepping on the property. We were near the property, and he got very upset with us and ran us away from it. And to the point where it was a difference of we were standing 10 feet from it, and he wasn't happy with that. He was happier when we were standing 20 feet away from it, which just kind of felt like a little bit of a show of force more than anything.
Yeah. Oh, that's sad.
Yeah.
But yeah, we got, Shifty, I love you. Don't miss.
Don't miss. That's the actual quote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then there's another close up of the house. I mean, you could see just all these bullet holes. I mean, it's just crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. I can't believe like it hasn't been renovated yet. Like, decades ago. So that's what amazes me. That it's even.
I would love for it. I'd love for it to last forever.
Yeah, now, especially
nobody
now.
with such things.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really cool. But yeah, here's more of the memorial, and talks about Spears' run and the tank and the howitzer there, and there's a picture of the tank right there, which was cool.
Yeah.
But anyway, on to the cemetery. So this is the cool cemetery. Proud remembrance of the achievements of our sons and humble tribute to their sacrifices and memorial has been erected by the U.S. of A.
Should say sons and daughters, especially at that cemetery.
Oh yeah, because we're about to see the nurse.
Yeah.
Anyway, here you go, Heather. Here's another map.
Wow.
Yeah,
Pretty cool.
these maps were so cool. And so here we go. Here's William McGee, another Medal of Honor recipient, and then Willie Reeder were two graves that we saw, which were really cool.
Reeder is right there next to McGee. I've done a lot of research about Reeder, and Reeder was accidentally shot by a fellow soldier in a negligent discharge of a firearm incident, which makes his loss of life all the more tragic, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, that's what happened to my friend's grandfather, Captain Felkins. He was with a private who had a grenade launcher on his gun that was trying to kind of dislodge, and it blew up and killed them both, which is sad. Then we got, here's Julian and Day Turner, which is really cool. Another Medal of Honor recipient. Folks, you got to watch my Medal of Honor video. I talk about all these guys, and their stories are amazing. Don't have time to go over each of them here. Otherwise, we'd be here all day. But really, really cool stuff.
Yeah, that Day Turner Medal of Honor action is pretty incredible. He
Yeah.
set the enemy on fire and then killed them with their own weapons.
Oh yes. Oh, it's badass. That was one of the coolest stories you told us. I mean, it was so cool. I mean, folks, if you haven't heard this, I mean, my goodness, just hearing about it was just amazing. And then reading the citation was even cooler. I mean, but Marty told us a little bit more of the details. And you know, for somebody to stab somebody with a bayonet, doesn't have anything, throws down a gas lantern and it catches guys on fire, and then goes out and starts using their own weapons against them is so cool.
Yeah.
So
and that's the kind of behavior that'll get you killed early in life. And
Yes.
that's why he didn't live to see old age. A
Nope.
month today after his Medal of Honor action, he was doing the same stuff and he got himself killed.
Yep.
Yeah.
But he's one of those badasses that earned the Medal of Honor for that reason too. So even though they're not buried next to each other, here you go. Here's Muck and Pinkala. They're buried in separate areas of the cemetery, but here's both Muck and Pinkala and their actual graves. And Marty mentioned that a person that had come up here quite a bit to visit them was Malarkey, right?
Yeah.
Because he was good friends with them.
Yeah.
So.
And just for the record, those are 2 complete sets of remains.
Mm-hmm.
It's entertainment. It's not a documentary. What you saw in the documentary, what you saw in the series, Band of Brothers, that's not actually what happened to the 2 of them.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yep.
It's for dramatic effect.
It
And
is.
it works.
Yeah.
It works because we remember their names now, because the very powerful way that their deaths are depicted in the series. But that's not how they died.
Yep.
At least they weren't blown to pieces the way that the series would make you think.
Yeah.
Yep. And Marty tells the story and it ties into a whole bunch, and he and I pieced together a lot more to it. But you're going to have to go on the tour to find that out. I don't want him to reveal all his stories because it's just not fair to him. All right. And I do want you to tell this story again. There's Kenneth Webb, and then there's a female that's buried here, and that's why we say daughters. Nancy Leo, who's the nurse. I forget the story. Can you maybe retell some of that? Because it's just amazing to hear about her.
Yeah. Nancy Leo was an officer in the U.S. Army nurse. And at the end of the war, she had received word that her sister was in Paris. And so she arranged for a Jeep to transport her to Paris so that she could visit her sister. And there was a Jeep accident on the way, and that's what resulted in her death. So she dies after the war's over with, just trying to get across the road to see her sister.
Yeah. Sad, but
we
she's
we lose a lot of people at the end of the war
Yeah.
to vehicular accidents, to include George Patton himself.
Yeah.
Yep. And then Patrick Neal was another one that we saw, and of course we had to visit the old man.
Yeah.
And there's Patton's grave. And, you know, there's a lot of discussion about Patton's death. And more, again, guys, this is why you go on these tours, because Marty explained what actually happened. There's not really much of a conspiracy. And then the real conspiracy is not so much him getting the accident and getting paralyzed. It's how he died in the hospital.
Yeah, the pneumonia in the hospital.
Yep.
I find that to actually have some conspiracy to it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's all people want to talk about at George Patton's grave, or conspiracy theories.
Yeah. So, and there's a close up of his grave. And then here's another picture of these wonderful maps, Heather.
Wow. Very cool.
Yep. All right. Let's go to Hagenau real quick. And you have, Band of Brothers didn't actually shoot here, but what do you know? It looks almost like the set.
Yeah, they built the house on the set in England to look just like observation point number 2, the house you see there.
Nice.
Yep.
Nice work.
Yep. And then here's where the crossing was. It's got a marker. And let me see if I got, the gray house. This one's the actual house they went to, right, Marty?
The house was located near there, but it was demolished during the war. But it's basically where the gray house is.
Okay.
And the memorial marker that's downriver is for the final liberation of Hagenau, which comes in March. But it just so happens when they put that memorial marker in, they're only about 100 meters away from the spot where the last patrol crossed the motor canal.
Ah, okay, cool. Yeah,
So,
and it's
not
different than what was depicted, and you guys will have to go on the tour to find out. There's a lot more to it than what you see in the show. And some of the men that were depicted as going on the patrol did not go on the patrol, but nonetheless, here is just the pictures of the patrol. And then this is on the other side where, there are apartment buildings now, but there were houses and places where they had machine guns. And then there was like a 50 cal tank, right? They
pulled up a half track that mounted the 145 quadra mount, the 50 caliber machine gun mount system.
Yeah.
They pulled them up to lay down covering fire to cover the withdrawal of the patrol.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, all right, get to the last section of stuff here real quick.
I'm surprised you didn't put any photos from Fort Simserhof, which was the Maginot Line fortress that we visited.
Oh, they're coming up.
Oh, they are coming up. Good.
They're coming up. They're coming up. They're right on here. Yeah, I had to divide it up, and I thought, okay, well, let's do the Maginot Line as we're going into Germany, because right after that we get the Siegfried line as well. Yeah. So,
yeah,
I'm getting to that right now. Okay, here we go. At this stage. And then, so this is a museum that we went to, and we went into the Maginot Line. And this I took a picture of this map and I got a close up, and it just kind of shows the Maginot Line, which the Maginot Line is interesting because they built it before World War II. And the idea of, hey, the Germans, there could be another war. Let's defend France. And we get to go into this awesome fortress. And you're like sitting there going, whoa, this is cool. You had men that stayed here. Now, the significance of the fortress that I thought was interesting was just all the guns, all the caliber, all supplies where you could have men stay for months at a time underground in this fortress without any problems. The other aspect of it was we had to wear our jackets because it was really cold in there. Yeah. But so this is kind of the opening, and you can see these are spots where machine guns were.
Wow.
Yeah. And then intricate, you see kind of inside, some of their supplies were run by a light rail system.
Wow.
Here, that was really cool. And see, there's your rail cars. And of course, see the electricity going through to it. They had a chapel, desks and offices. They had a dentist and a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, these are the bunks and more office area. I'm going through this kind of fast because it was interesting, and then the kitchen. I mean, it was fascinating. I mean, you could keep a whole army here, and then, the electric power grids and everything else there. It was fascinating. And, even though it's not part of Band of Brothers, this is another thing that you get to do on these tours because Stephen Ambrose is trying to get you to have a feel for the entire war and everything that happened. And the relationship to Band of Brothers also with this is that the Germans captured parts of the Maginot Line and took some of the guns. And here are some of the guns. Now, I apologize. They didn't light the guns very well, so it was kind of hard to really see.
Yeah. It was super dark there, wasn't it?
Oh, it was incredibly dark. And I'm like sitting there going, guys, just put some lights here because this is what people want to see. But you get to see some of these cool guns that were sticking out, and they would have, so here's the tour guide that was in there that would explain. They had like little lookout posts where you could see where Germans or people were and do that. And then these are the guns that would be in there. And it's so cool because these are like little turrets sticking out of the ground that were there to defend France. And I don't know that they did that great a job defending France if they got captured pretty easily and their guns got taken Normandy.
Well, the thing is that the Maginot Line did exactly what it was supposed to do, and it functioned as an effective deterrent because the Germans did not want to attack it directly.
Yeah.
The problem was that the Germans made use of a new type of warfare that coordinated air and mechanized units on the ground that broke through. And where the Germans broke through was not along the frontier defended by the Maginot Line, but they broke through in Belgium, where the Belgians, who had also obligated themselves to build a similar line, and then they decided not to do so after 1936. And the result was there was a big gap in the line, and the Germans exploited that. And then that led to the French government capitulating. And that capitulation then led to the men who manned these Maginot Line fortresses. That led to them being ordered to, all right, abandon your work and turn yourself over to the Germans.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and you can kind of see the map of where they were stationed. But it's just cool that they had that. And then I couldn't believe I was saying this, but this is a pretty badass French tank.
It is.
Now, it was raining and very slippery. I don't think they would have let us get on it, but still pretty cool to see another tank.
MX-30.
Yeah. I'm all for seeing tanks. But it was really cool. And then you took us into what was known as the wine country. And I thought this was cool that we saw up on the wall here. This is an eagle, and the swastika had been kind of chiseled out.
Yeah.
That was cool. And some people thought it was graffiti, but I found this other picture to be true art. Somebody engraved "My beloved state of Texas" here, and Mineral Wells, which is a couple hours to the west of me. That's right there
where Camp Walters was, isn't it?
Yeah. So,
and there it is in Schweigen-Rechtenbach in Germany.
Yeah. So there's the wine and the wine press. I just thought this was really kind of a cool, interesting area. And then he took us up around the corner where we got to see the Siegfried line, which this is cool. These are also known as dragon's teeth. And these are huge clumps, just metal brought into the ground. And it just was so solid. It's cool. And to give you perspective of how big it is, there's me standing next to one of them.
Yeah.
But yeah. This is where some of it used to be, and you could see there's kind of like metal lines, and they're sticking in. They're connected like 3 or 4 of them all together. So digging them up was a chore for when somebody dug them up. But the whole idea was to be able to repel invaders with these metal spikes. But I thought that was so cool. And this is Marty taking us to another aspect that while Easy Company didn't run into these things, didn't have anything to do with them, it's part of the war and a significant part of the war.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an educational tour, and if there's one thing I'm guilty of, is that's trying to cram too much content into the tour. And so that stop, that wasn't a planned stop. I just threw that in. Sabine and I talked about it extensively and decided, hey, we've got time. Let's just do it. I think everybody
awesome.
That's really cool to see. I've never seen that.
We based that on the vibe of everybody else on the bus. And if the bus has the right attitude and they're in it to learn, we'll go do it.
Yeah. Followed by a few woohoos by me. So I was famous for going, woohoo, let's go.
Yeah. Good. Sometimes you have to guilt the other people into being enthusiastic.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And then we're going to just go through Dachau real briefly. Folks, I would say go to Dachau. Dachau's probably a little bit more tame than some of the other concentration camps, but it's still very moving. The interesting thing about Dachau that I didn't know is that there's actually a covenant of nuns that live right on the campus, right on the campus of Dachau, and I had no idea of that. We had tried to go back in there and found out that no, this is private property. Yeah. We're like, oh, okay. But yeah, the concentration camp, you kind of get a feel for the facilities here, the beds, the bathroom area.
And it's slightly related to the Easy Company story, although Easy Company did not participate in the liberation of Dachau. it participated in the liberation of a camp that was part of the Dachau. It was one of the Dachau sub-camps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting to see the lines and the rows. And they have memorials here, both Christian and Jewish memorials. And you could see a bell and different things. It's just really fascinating to see all of this stuff. And I didn't take pictures of the gas chamber because I just thought it was too gruesome to take.
Yeah, it's kind
yeah.
of creepy there.
Yeah. But then we headed towards Berchtesgaden, and oh my gosh,
amazing.
folks, you're about to get some pretty pictures here. I mean, oh my goodness, it's just so gorgeous. And the thing about it is you have all these pretty, just inspiring places, and yet evil was planned there. Some of the most heinous evil.
Oh, look, you're already in one of the most beautiful places. Why would you want France?
Yeah, I agree. Or Russia.
Come on.
Yeah. So this is where we stayed, and it's actually it's Gehrig's. It was where Gehrig lived, right?
Yeah, the Intercontinental Hotel, which is now the Kempinski, was built over the site where Hermann Goering's personal residence was located.
Yep. And straight up from there, this is my zoomed in lens on my camera, which I'm like, wow, that's a pretty good shot of the eagle's nest right there, which we'll see more of. But this is just shots from my hotel. I couldn't believe that we stayed here. Did you guys stay there on the next tour?
No, we did not.
Oh, man. So we lucked out.
Yeah, you really did. We stayed in Zellamzee, and it's not the end of the world, but it's certainly not as nice as staying at the Kempinski right there at the Obersalzberg.
Yeah. This is one of my buddies, Jeff, that he got on a swing, and you could swing, and overlooking that. I mean, Heather, you probably would want to get on that swing, right? Maybe.
Maybe.
But yeah, there's another picture of the eagle's nest from.
So cool.
Yeah, I mean, that's how cool the zoom on my camera was that day. This is also his pool, where his pool was.
Wow.
Yeah, but yeah, the hotel. This is just, I mean, right here, and then the eagle's nest is right up there. But yeah, that's the Kempinski, and there's our tour bus, and then there's some pictures of our group. So. Gosh, I don't know why I was taking so many pictures of the eagle's nest from there, but
it's kind of hard not to, when you see it for the first time. You get a little bit struck with it.
Yeah, and the cool thing is that we had this map that told us what all mountains we were seeing and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It was really cool. Yeah, some more of our group, Kempinski. All right, now we're getting into the next day on the tour. We're visiting sites, and we're fixing to visit the Bergerauf. But I forget the name of this building that's probably going to get torn down pretty soon. What was the name of this one?
That's the Hotels in Turken. Yeah, and we're all worried that the Turken was purchased 2 years ago, and it used to be open because you can access the tunnel system from the Turken.
Yeah,
but all of that closed down when the new buyer took possession of the property. And we don't know what the new buyer plans to do with the property. And our big concern is that the silence on the subject is an indication that the new owner is going to demolish the structure, which would be a loss because that was there during the National Socialist rise to power. It was there throughout World War II, and it's still there today.
And there's a guard shack right here, right by it. But the tunnel system below that led to Gehrig and then Hitler's house and a couple other houses, right?
Right.
Wow.
Yep. And this is just down the road from where we were at the Kempinski. And then right down the road around the corner was where Hitler's house was, the Bergerauf. And it tells you a little bit about it right here. And this is kind of the back wall of the house. And this right here, our second tour guide that specializes in all this stuff was showing us what the house looked like on these slides. I couldn't get a good picture of what he was holding up, but essentially you're standing kind of in the living room where he looked out upon the mountains, and this is what Hitler would have seen. So, and all kinds of evil was planned there, including like the invasion of Russia and several other things. And so this is kind of the picturesque landscape. And then here's more of where the house is. Kind of an area stretched around here, and then there's a garage area further down, but there's nothing left of it. It's just basically it's all leveled. They bombed it, and then some of it was standing not too long after that, and it just kind of fell down the side of the mountain, right?
Oh, then it was. I mean, the structure was still mostly standing until 1954, when the U.S. Army of Occupation, because Bavaria fell in the U.S. zone of occupation, and the mountaintop became a U.S. Army recreation area. The U.S. Army ultimately made the decision to demolish the ruins of the house. And so all you see there now is rubble and the retaining wall. That's all that's left today. But that's the spot that you could call the last prize of the war in Europe during the Second World War. That's also, I think, the most toxic soil in all of Europe when it comes to the formation of National Socialist ideology, because it was at a place called the Kampfhäusel, just up the hill from the site of the Berghof, Adolf Hitler's house. It was at the Kampfhäusel where he dictated his political manifesto in the form of Mein Kampf to Rudolf Hess. And that's the book that sold and made money and produced royalties that he used to buy Haus Wachenfeld, which became the Berghof, which is what we're looking at the ruins of right now.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And also it's sad that there are actually evil people that put memorials there.
Yeah, they do every year. They go up there on his birthday every year and leave memorial candles and leave little bottles of schnapps for him. It's a little creepy, but there are people like that out there still.
Mm-hmm. So it's real cool. We got to see some Nazi tunnels, a little bit of those. I didn't want to put all those pictures on here because it's again, this is another part of the tour that you need to take, because we'll take you up there. But the next is the Eagle's Nest, and we're going up to the Eagle's Nest, and you go in these buses up to the tower part. And this is going into the tunnel area where we get to the gold elevator. Now, Marty told me some interesting stuff about the doors that lead into this. Marty, do you want to tell them what you told me about the doors and the door handles?
Yeah, door handles are missing because members of Easy Company looted them at the end of the war. Easy Company wasn't the first unit to reach the tunnel and reach the Eagle's Nest. The French got there first, then some soldiers from the U.S. Army's 7th Infantry Regiment of the 3rd Infantry Division, they got there as well. Easy Company just got there when the stop order went into effect, meaning that when Easy Company got there, they were ordered to stay there. So they had time to do some exploring. And while they were exploring, they also did a little bit of souvenir hunting, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. You couldn't ask for a better place to be when a stop order comes in. Like, how lucky are you?
Yeah. The best place for souvenir hunting in all of Europe.
Yeah, and who got the door handles?
It was
the Winners. Winners took them.
No, I think it was Welsh actually that got
Welsh. Them. Okay, Welsh got them. So. And then Marty had taken me up to the group had already gathered. I was on the second one because I couldn't get on the first one because the elevator is limited. So I came up on the second one, and Marty showed me the fireplace, which is pretty cool. Apparently, the thing is to chip a piece, which I didn't do. And there's a picture, which is cool. And then this is our group right there in kind of a dining area, which was kind of cool. There's a restaurant up there. They converted it kind of into a restaurant, and then they've got a couple of areas. The real reason why you go up to see this is coming up, and I'll show you. So these are some of the scenic views directly from some of the windows there. And this is outside the back. And there's one of our lovely members of our tour. But the cool thing is you get to hike up like a little hill, and further on back, it just keeps going. To where you can hike, and just these views are just amazing. And I'm just going to kind of go through some of these pictures. Just the town below and the mountains. Just look at all that green.
In the chat, Daz is asking, was the fireplace a gift from Mussolini?
Oh, I don't know.
That's the big mythology. And what we know now is that it was not. And that the reason that the mythology was born is that it's made of Carrara marble, which came from Italy. And I guess the the mythology just took that next step of assuming that, well, if it came from Italy, it must have been a gift from Mussolini. But there's no proof providing any indication that Mussolini provided that as a gift. So boo, how about that for party pooper stuff right there?
Yeah. But hey, look, there's looking back down in the hotel.
Yeah, wow. Great views.
And there's looking back at the eagle's nest. And there's a cross with the Edelweiss.
Edelweiss, yeah.
But I think this was me zooming in. I think that's the river that goes into LMZ, if I'm not.
That's the Lake Königssee, which is a standing independent lake that's only a few miles. That would be just to the north.
Oh, okay, north.
That's to the south of Berchtesgaden.
Okay, the south. Okay, all right. My bad. But I mean, it's just picturesque.
Yeah, but that's Lake Königssee, where a 16-year-old girl from Baden-Baden found a 5-ounce gold bar in that lake in 2015.
Oh my gosh! So I think treasure
that.
hunters have been going to that lake, right?
I heard about that, looking for gold in those lakes.
I mean, the incident proved that there's definitely Nazi gold in that lake.
Yeah.
And they keep an eye on it.
Did she get to keep it, or did she have to?
She got to keep it. It was a huge controversy in Germany, but she was with her family. She went swimming right at the that would be the southern end of Königssee. And when she walked in, she saw something shiny on the bottom and pulled it up. And the decision was ultimately made that she got to keep it because she found it. Wow. There's more gold in that lake. It's just that nobody is allowed to go looking for it.
Just you have to stumble upon it, basically.
Oh yeah, and it was marked because it was a smelting firm called Degussa had created it, and they put a government inspection stamp on it. There's Königssee once again in the photo on the right.
Yeah, I just kept taking photos the higher and higher I went, and then there's more members of our crew. And there's another key member of our crew. And then the steps down. Some of this is on the way down. And then we're in Berchtesgaden, and this is kind of where they surrendered. And I didn't get to hear the whole story because I really had to go to the restroom. And so Marty took me back over to a hotel. And the most interesting thing about the hotel was I'm in the hotel, and the weirdest thing is playing Four Non-Blondes with What's Going On. And I'm sitting there going, I'm in Berchtesgaden.
Nothing makes you think of peaceful Bavarian mountain towns more than Four Non-Blondes.
Yeah.
It was hilarious. I was like, oh my gosh.
Hilarious and random.
Yeah. This is also a graveyard, which I have to point this out because this is very important. So Dietrich Eckart is buried there, and he's the actual bad guy. So if you ever want to go back in time, it's not Hitler that you want to kill. It's really this guy who was kind of Hitler's mentor. And Marty told us a little bit about him, and I'm just going to mention it. He's the real big bad. And the other thing about the German cemetery is their plots only last for like 25 years at a time. And then you have to pay to keep it, or you have to move your person out of this graveyard. And so this guy died, in 1930s or 40s, right?
26.
Or 26. Sorry, 26.
Let me just double check it.
Yeah. Somebody's been paying for his grave site ever since.
Yeah.
Yeah, they paid for the permanent marker, and they have paid to lease it in 23. He died in 23.
Yeah.
So money has gone into preserving Dietrich Eckart's burial site.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling that it always will.
Yeah. And he's the one that basically mentored Hitler and really taught him about National Socialism, right?
Yeah, he was an early member of this thing called the Thule Society, which was a reading organization that believed deeply in anti-Semitism. It had anti-immigrant ideology woven into it. And at a critical time immediately after World War I, Eckart was in a position to exert a lot of influence on the focusing political thought of a young Adolf Hitler. And Eckert provided him with some financial backing at a critical time. It was Eckert that invited Adolf to come down to the Berchtesgaden, the Land Valley, for the very first time in 1922. Eckert, in almost every way, laid the groundwork that Adolf Hitler would then use to launch his political career.
Yeah. All right. So we're getting towards the end of the tour, and we go into Zellamzee and just some of the castles that we saw. Now, apparently we were close, but we did not go see this because it would have taken us way off the beaten path. But apparently we were not that far from where they filmed Where Eagles Dare.
Yeah, we were close.
Yeah, we were close. And I'm like, I talked to Marty about that. He's like, yeah, we're close, but to go show you guys that would take too much of the tour.
It would be a day. We'd have to take a day to go look at movie set stuff.
Yeah, we didn't want to do that. So it's pretty cool. And we took this final photo here. And one of the cool things is one of the actual members of Easy Company was a patient for one of the people on our tours, and his widow is still living, and she gives pictures of him, Zimmerman, and we each held a photograph up for this picture, and I think it's just really cool, very touching photo.
Cool.
And it's right there. We did it right there at the site where the last Easy Company photograph was taken in July of 1945.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the one person that wasn't in that Easy Company photograph was Luz, because he got hurt in a motorcycle accident.
Only time he got hurt during the Second World War.
Yep. So real quick, I'll just show you a couple of photos of Zellamzee, because right after that we had lunch on this beautiful lake, and just look at the beautiful stuff in Austria. I mean, it's gorgeous, the countryside. Here are a couple more pictures with myself and some other members of our group. So really cool. I mean, look at that.
Yeah,
it's just so pretty. But yeah, there's the Grand Hotel where they were stationed, and this is kind of the lake where Winters swam, because according to his historians and people, he didn't really swim. But here is the lake. A great picture of the lake and a couple of our members. I mean, that's an epic photo right there. That's a great photo. But yeah, there's another photo of it, just really pretty, and just the picturesque countryside. I mean, look at all the shades of green. It's just amazing. And then just other pictures, and we just ate at a restaurant right there, and we had to use Google Translate for the menu, but the guy was really cool, really friendly, and we had apple strudel with the vanilla sauce, and it was excellent. It was great. But yeah, and so that was the tour. It was cool. It was just amazing, and so I can't thank Marty and Stephen Ambrose Tours enough for this wonderful tour, this opportunity to go that. I hope you guys enjoyed the pictures. It was so much fun, guys. If you got 2 weeks to be able to use on vacation to go see this, it's a bucket list. I want to say this, Marty, that I came in with kind of an understanding of Easy Company and reading the books, but I gained a better understanding of not only Easy Company, but the entire war. I got to learn, a lot more about D-Day and get a better understanding of D-Day, get an appreciation, understanding for Market Garden, gain a huge appreciation for what they did in Bastogne and the Battle of the Bulge, and then into Germany. It was so neat to see. And overall, it just made me really respect and appreciate what not only the men of Easy Company did, but everybody who served in World War II and everybody who serves or are currently serving in the U.S. military. I'm so thankful for their service. I'm so thankful for all that they did here and what men and women who serve in the military continue to do. Just a sincere appreciation for that. And I'm so thankful for that, and so thankful for you to teach me some of this history and show me some of these sites. It was just amazing. So,
well, I wish Stephen Ambrose was still alive to hear that, because that would warm his heart. That's why he started the company. He really wanted to become an educator and an ambassador for this subject. He experienced a lot of success with the book Band of Brothers, and that was because it was through the lens of the men of E Company 506 that we could follow the story from D-Day to the last prize at Berchtesgaden at Adolf Hitler's house. And Stephen Ambrose simply just had a gift as a storyteller, and he was able to get that story told in a compelling way that then turned into an HBO miniseries that we're still talking about a quarter of a century later. And if he could have known then that 25 years later in 2025 that someone would come away from an experience on a tour like this, like you did, I think it would please him a great deal, because I knew him, and what he wanted first and foremost was to get people interested in history, and it sounds like it worked with you.
Oh yeah, very much so. Yeah, it was awesome. But anyway, we're wrapping up our show. Marty, do you have anything that you'd like to plug, like any shows that you're going to be on, or any tours that you guys have open spots that you want to plug?
Well, please keep watching the History Channel, specifically History's Greatest Mysteries, because we've got new episodes coming up soon. I just did an episode about Area 51 that's going to be very interesting, so check that out when it comes up. But other than that, you can find out more about the tours that we offer by visiting StephenAmbroseHistoricalTours.com.
Mm-hmm. And the website's in the link for the video. Heather, I know you're not a YouTuber, but I know you want to plug our great Doomcock and some of his channels and stuff that he's got coming up.
Well, I just want to say to Marty, thanks so much for coming. This has been just a great way to wrap this up. I remember watching Band of Brothers when it first came out, and I just fell in love with the show. I've watched it so many times, I can't even count. And so when Rob asked me to review the show with him, I was really excited about that. And just in reviewing it again, I actually spent the time to look up a little more history, look at maps, look at, actual battles. And I learned so much more about it as we reviewed each episode. And so getting to talk to you today, getting some of these stories, this has been really great. So much fun to hear. I'm so glad you could come. And thanks to the chat for always coming with us and adding so much to these live streams. It's been great having you guys all here. And yes, I am a wrench and sometimes guest on Pop Culture Breakdown on Overlord DVD's channel, which we will be reviewing The Running Man as the movie we love this week. Great classic with based off a Stephen King adaptation with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And always in the chat on Friday Night Frolics. So hope to see you guys all there.
Yeah. And I'm actually one of the pundits on Pop Culture Breakdown. So I will be on Doomcock's channel on Wednesday night reviewing that with the rest of the group. Coming up on my channel, folks, you want to stick around for this, because on Tuesday night, I'm actually going to see an early screening of Superman, and I will go live to give a review, a non-spoiler review. I'll give my initial thoughts. It'll probably be about 10 o'clock Central on Tuesday night. So if you want to join that chat and ask me any questions, as long as they're non-spoiler, I'll answer them and give you my initial thoughts about Superman and probably do a review. And then coming up next week, we are moving on to the Pacific, and we are going to do episode 1 of the Pacific. And, ironically, Marty has some ties to it. You want to tell us what you did on the Pacific?
Yeah, I worked on the series as a part of the research and writing team. At the time of shortly after Stephen Ambrose's death, his son Hugh Ambrose took over, and we began a process of trying to create a storyline that a miniseries could be built on. We created a storyline that the series ended up not using all of it, but it used some of it. And in this way, we contributed sort of the heart of the series. And I was involved in that from, 2003 until our premiere in November 2009.
Wow.
That's a lot of time. It felt like I was on that project forever, because I kind of was. 6 years is a long time to be involved in any TV project.
Oh, yeah, I bet. So come back next week and learn more about that. And then the week after that, folks, we're doing the hits of 1973. So if you love your 70s music, we'll do the top 40 of 1973. But I want to say thank you to everybody in the chat that showed up, and anybody who's watching afterwards. Thank you so much. We certainly appreciate you guys watching and being on the show. Please like and share this. I certainly thank you so much for joining us here. And until next time, we'll see you later.
All right.
Take care, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
All right.